Rain hammered the stained glass, while the most feared ruler on the continent sat alone in a throne room that suddenly felt like a tomb. 3 years ago, Draven Kaelor made a choice that shattered everything. He chose power over the one person who ever truly saw him. Now the Empire still bows, enemies still vanish at his name, but the voice he needs most no longer exists inside his kingdom. This is the story of what happens when an Alpha King realizes too late that crowns are temporary, but losing your soulmate is forever. Stay until the end because what comes next will gut you. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments so I know my pack is watching. The obsidian throne felt colder than it had any right to feel in the middle of summer. Draven Kaelor sat motionless while rain hammered against the massive stained glass windows of Ironfang Palace, each droplet exploding against images of wolves mid-hunt, fangs bared, eyes burning with conquest. The storm outside matched nothing compared to the one rotting inside his chest where the mate bond used to live. 3 years. 1,095 days since Lyanna walked out of this palace and took every goddamn thing that mattered with her. The Alpha King of Ravaran still ruled the largest wolf empire on the continent. Generals still bowed when he entered rooms. Noble houses still trembled beneath his decrees. Enemies still vanished at the mention of his name, their bloodlines erased like they never existed. But power had become strangely silent, because the one voice he wanted to hear no longer existed inside his kingdom. Draven stared at his hands, the same hands that had conquered nations, that had signed death warrants without hesitation, that had once held Lyanna against his chest while she laughed about something ridiculous he could no longer remember. These hands had built an empire. These same hands had destroyed the only thing worth having. The memory hit him like it did every night around this hour. Lyanna, standing in his royal war chamber 3 years ago, silver-gray eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall, her voice barely a whisper but somehow louder than every general shouting around them. "You don't love me anymore. You love the throne more." He had been exhausted that night. Exhausted from the civil war brewing in the Eastern Territories. Exhausted from noble families screaming that his Omega mate was too soft, too compassionate, too weak to stand beside a ruler forged by conquest and blood. Exhausted from trying to hold together an empire that demanded cruelty as the price of stability. So when Lyanna spoke those words, when she dared to question his devotion in front of his war council, something inside Draven snapped. The words came out before he could stop them. "Then perhaps you were never strong enough to stand beside a king." The silence that followed was absolute. Every wolf in that chamber froze. Even the most battle-hardened generals looked away because they knew instantly that something sacred had just been butchered. The mate bond shattered so violently Draven nearly collapsed right there on the stone floor. Pain erupted through his chest like someone had reached inside and torn out his heart while it was still beating. His knees buckled. His vision blurred. The bond that had connected him to Lyanna since the Blood Moon ceremony 3 years prior ripped apart like fabric under claws. But Lyanna did not cry, did not beg, did not scream. She simply removed the moonstone ring he had placed on her hand during their bonding ceremony and laid it beside his crown on the war table. The small click of stone against wood echoed through the chamber louder than any battlefield roar Draven had ever heard. Then she turned and walked away from the Empire, her footsteps echoing through corridors that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. And Draven, poisoned by arrogance and blinded by the weight of the crown, let her go. He told himself she would come back. Omegas always came back to their alphas. The bond would force her to return. She would realize how impossible the world was without his protection. She would understand that he had been right all along, that the Empire required hard choices, that love was a luxury kings could not afford when survival demanded brutality. Except Lyanna never came back, and the bond, shattered beyond repair, never forced anything except agony that woke him screaming in the middle of the night. That was the night Ravaran began to decay from the inside out. Not politically. The Empire actually grew stronger after she left. Draven crushed the rebellions with methodical savagery, expanded borders through wars that left entire territories burned to ash, destroyed rival packs so thoroughly their names were erased from history, turned Ravaran into the most feared wolf empire on the continent, a kingdom where even whispered dissent resulted in execution. But spiritually, the kingdom rotted. The throne room grew colder each season despite fires that burned day and night. Banquets became unbearable, filled with nobles who smiled with their mouths while their eyes calculated how to exploit the king's emptiness. Victories tasted like ash. Military conquests meant nothing when there was no one to share them with. Draven slept beside empty sheets while phantom memories tortured him nightly. Lyanna laughing in the palace gardens while trying to teach him the names of flowers he did not care about. Lyanna stealing his royal cloak after council meetings because she liked how it smelled like cedar and smoke and him. Lyanna standing on palace balconies at sunset telling him that rulers who stop listening to their people eventually become tyrants no different than the enemies they claim to oppose. At first he buried regret beneath violence. That was the instinct of dominant wolves. When pain appears, destroy something louder than it. Drown grief in blood and conquest until the screaming inside your head gets drowned out by the screaming of your enemies. But grief is patient, and regret is the one enemy kings cannot execute. The realization came slowly, creeping through Draven's consciousness like poison through veins. Every reform Lyanna once begged him to make had been correct. The starving Omega districts she warned him about eventually revolted, burning supply warehouses and killing tax collectors in the streets. The noble clans he trusted to maintain order betrayed him anyway, forming secret alliances with rival kingdoms. The generals who encouraged him to abandon compassion and rule through fear secretly manipulated his wars for profit, selling weapons to both sides while Ravaran's soldiers died in fields that meant nothing. She had seen the truth long before he did, because Lyanna understood something Draven never learned until too late. Empires are not destroyed by weakness. They are destroyed when rulers mistake cruelty for strength. A knock echoed through the throne room, sharp and deliberate. Draven did not move, did not acknowledge, just kept staring at the rain while his second-in-command, Cade Theron, entered with the cautious gait of someone approaching a predator that might strike without warning. Smart man. Cade was one of the few wolves who survived the purges after Lyanna left, mostly because he had the sense to keep his mouth shut about the king's personal failures and the wisdom to follow orders without question. He stopped 5 feet from the throne and bowed low, his dark hair slick with rain from whatever hellish task Draven had sent him on earlier. "Go ahead," Draven said without looking at him. "Whatever bad news you brought better be worth interrupting me." Cade straightened but kept his eyes down, staring at the floor like the obsidian tiles held the secrets of the universe. "The eastern border is secure, Your Majesty. The Ashclaw Pack tried to cross into our territory last night. We killed their alpha and scattered the survivors into the wastelands." "Good. The grain shipments to the southern provinces are delayed because of flooding in the lowlands. The roads are completely washed out. Handle it." The Noble Council is demanding an audience. They want to discuss the new taxation policies. Tell them I do not care what they want. And there was another sighting. Draven's entire body went rigid. His hands gripped the armrests of the throne hard enough that the obsidian cracked beneath his fingers. The sound echoed through the massive chamber like breaking bones. Hairline fractures spread through the ancient stone that had supported generations of Alpha Kings, stone that was supposed to be unbreakable. "Where?" Draven growled, his voice dropping to something barely human. Cade swallowed hard, his throat working visibly. "Frostveil Mountains, Northern Territory, beyond the last outposts. A silver-eyed healer living in some ruined sanctuary. The locals call her the Moon Queen. She is protecting rogue wolves and abandoned children, building some kind of haven for outcasts and broken pack members." Draven closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. 3 months ago, the first rumor reached his ears. A woman matching Lyanna's description seen beyond the northern wastelands where civilization ended and the frozen wilderness began. He killed the messenger for speaking her name aloud, tore out the young wolf's throat before he could finish the sentence, because hope hurt worse than guilt, and Draven could not afford to feel either. But the rumors kept coming. A healer with silver eyes who could cure wounds no medicine could touch. A leader who commanded respect without dominance, who earned loyalty through compassion instead of fear. A woman who looked at broken wolves cast out by their packs and saw worth instead of weakness. Every description carved another wound into Draven's chest, because it meant one unbearable truth. Lyanna had not just survived without him. She had thrived. She had become everything the Empire told her she could never be, and she did it the moment she escaped him. "How certain are you?" Draven asked quietly, his voice deceptively calm. Cade hesitated, knowing that the king's quietest moments were often his most dangerous. "I sent scouts, Your Majesty." 3 different teams over the past month. They all confirmed the same details. Silver-gray eyes, scent like frost and wildflowers. She wears a silver cloak lined with wolf fur, and the rogues follow her like she is royalty. They say she has created something up there in the ruins, a sanctuary where pack law does not apply, where strength is not the only currency that matters. What else? Cade shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable. "They say she is happy, Your Majesty." The words hit Draven like a blade between the ribs. Happy. Lyanna was happy without him. The woman he destroyed had rebuilt herself into something stronger and found joy in the process, while he sat on a throne that felt more like a grave with every passing day. "Prepare my horse," Draven said quietly. Cade blinked. "Your Majesty, I am going north." "You cannot be serious. The Noble Council will lose their minds if you abandon the capital again. They are already whispering that you have gone soft since the Omega left. They are questioning your fitness to rule. If you disappear now—" "Since I destroyed the best thing in my life," Draven finished coldly, turning to look at his second-in-command for the first time. "Yes, Cade, I am aware of what the Council whispers. Do I look like I give a damn what those parasites think?" Cade met his eyes for a brief moment, then looked away. "No, Your Majesty." "Good. Then prepare my horse. You leave in the morning?" "Tonight. The storm— I do not care if the gods themselves try to stop me. I do not care if the mountains collapse and the sky falls. Prepare my horse, or I will ride north on foot, and you can explain to the council why their king walked into the wilderness alone." Cade stared at him for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to argue further. Then he simply nodded. "As you command, Your Majesty." He turned to leave, but Draven's voice stopped him cold. "Cade." "Yes, Your Majesty." "If the council tries to stop me, kill them." Cade's expression did not change. He simply bowed deeper. "Understood, Your Majesty." He left the throne room, his footsteps fading into the storm outside, and Draven sat alone in the silence that followed. The truth settled over him like a burial shroud. He was about to do something unforgivable by the standards of every Alpha King who came before him. He was about to abandon his empire, ignore his duties to the crown, and chase after a woman who had every right to spit in his face when he arrived. The Noble Council would call it madness. The generals would call it weakness. History would call it the moment the great Draven Kaelor finally broke. But Draven no longer cared about legacy or honor or the weight of the crown pressing down on his skull like an iron vice. Because 3 years of ruling without Lyanna had taught him the most brutal lesson any king could learn. Empires are worthless if you have no one to share them with. And the throne is just a fancy chair when the person who made you human is gone. The journey north stripped Draven down to something raw and feral. He rode alone through the northern wastelands, refusing an escort, refusing the royal guard, refusing everything except a single horse and enough provisions to keep him alive. The first night he slept beside a dying fire in a forest so dense no moonlight penetrated the canopy. Wolves howled in the distance, wild and free, answering to no king and no crown and no empire built on blood. Draven envied them. The second day he crossed through villages that barely survived, places where Ravarin's prosperity never reached despite being technically within the Empire's borders. Children with hollow eyes and protruding ribs watched him pass from doorways. Women clutched infants against their chests like he might steal them for the war effort. Old men spat on the ground after he rode by, their contempt more honest than any courtier's smile. These were his people, and they looked at him like a disease they could not cure. One village elder, a grizzled wolf with scars covering half his face and one eye milky with blindness, blocked the road with a walking stick and stared Draven down with the kind of contempt only the truly broken can muster. "You are the king," the old wolf said. Not a question, a condemnation. Draven reined his horse to a stop. "I am." The old wolf spat into the dirt, a thick glob of saliva mixed with blood. "My grandson died in your war, 16 years old. You sent him to fight border skirmishes that meant nothing. He bled out in a field screaming for his mother while your generals drank wine in their tents and celebrated another glorious victory for the Empire. Draven said nothing because there was nothing to say. Every word would have been an insult to the dead. The old wolf stepped closer, his walking stick tapping against the frozen ground. His remaining eye burned with the kind of rage that outlives hope. "Tell me, King, what does your empire give us in exchange for our children?" "Security," Draven answered quietly. "Stability. Protection from rival packs." The old wolf laughed, bitter and broken, a sound like grinding glass. "Security. My daughter starves because your grain shipments never reach us. They get diverted to the capital where nobles throw feasts that could feed entire villages. Stability. My neighbor froze to death last winter because your coal mines only supply the wealthy districts. Protection. From what? The only monsters we fear wear crowns and call it leadership." Draven met the old wolf's eye and saw the truth reflected back at him with brutal clarity. This was what Lyanna had been trying to tell him 3 years ago. This was the rot she warned him about before he shut her out of council meetings, because the generals said Omegas did not understand military strategy. Before he ignored her warnings about corruption because the nobles said she was too soft to grasp political reality. Before he chose the advice of wolves, who told him what he wanted to hear over the woman who told him what he needed to know. "I am sorry," Draven said, and meant it. The old wolf stared at him for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped aside, clearing the road. "Sorry does not resurrect the dead, King, but at least you did not insult me by pretending my grief does not exist. That is more than most rulers would do." Draven rode past him without another word, but the old wolf's voice followed him down the road. "Whatever you are searching for in the north, I hope it destroys you. I hope it tears you apart the way your wars tore apart my family. And I hope you survive it, because living with what you have done is a worse punishment than death." Mchant. The third day brought Draven to a roadside inn that barely qualified as shelter. The building leaned precariously to one side like a drunk struggling to stand. Smoke leaked through holes in the roof. The door hung crooked on broken hinges. Inside, a handful of travelers huddled around a fire that produced more smoke than heat. They all went silent when Draven entered, recognizing the bearing of an alpha even if they did not recognize his face. The innkeeper, a rail-thin woman with suspicious eyes, approached cautiously. "We do not want trouble." "I am not here to cause any," Draven replied, dropping coins on the bar. "Food and a room." The woman snatched up the coins and disappeared into the kitchen without another word. Draven sat at the bar and stared into the fire while exhaustion settled into his bones. He had not slept properly in 3 years. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Lyanna's face in that war chamber, saw her remove the moonstone ring, saw her walk away while his pride kept him frozen in place. The innkeeper returned with a bowl of something that might have been stew and a cup of whatever alcohol they had available. She slid both across the bar and studied him carefully. "You're running from something," she said. Draven took a drink. The liquor burned going down, cheap and harsh. "No." "Running toward something then." "Maybe." The innkeeper refilled his cup without being asked. "Must be important if you're willing to travel through these parts. Nothing up north except ruins and ice and wolves who do not answer to any pack. I am looking for someone." "Alive or dead?" Draven paused. "I do not know anymore." The innkeeper leaned against the bar, her expression softening slightly. "Lost someone, did you?" In a manner of speaking. The innkeeper nodded like she understood perfectly. "My husband died 5 years ago. Raveran military. Died securing some border that changed hands 3 times in the following month. They sent me a medal and a letter saying he died with honor. Like honor puts food on the table. Like honor keeps the bed warm at night." She refilled his cup again. "Whatever you lost up north, I hope you find it. And I hope it was worth the journey." Draven looked at her. "What if it was my fault I lost them?" The innkeeper smiled sadly. "Then I hope they make you earn forgiveness. Nothing worth having comes easy, and redemption is the hardest thing to earn." Waltaise. The Frostvile Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky, snow-capped peaks disappearing into storm clouds that never seemed to move. The temperature dropped so severely, Draven's breath came out in visible clouds, and frost formed on his horse's mane. Locals warned him not to travel higher. The mountains are cursed, one villager said while watching Draven prepare his horse. Wolves who go up there do not come back the same. Some do not come back at all. What is up there? Draven asked. The villager shrugged, pulling his cloak tighter against the wind. Ruins. Old sanctuaries from before the Empire, from when wolves lived differently. Some say there is a woman living in Valemore Keep who can heal any wound. Others say she is a witch who steals the souls of alphas stupid enough to challenge her. Draven almost smiled. That sounds exactly like the woman I am looking for. The villager studied him carefully. You do not look like the kind of man who believes in healing. I did not used to, Draven admitted, tightening the saddle straps. But desperation changes wolves faster than time. The villager shook his head. Whatever you did to her must have been unforgivable if you are willing to climb those mountains alone. Draven mounted his horse and looked toward the peaks. I told the woman I loved that she was not strong enough to stand beside me. Then I spent 3 years proving I was not strong enough to exist without her. The villager whistled low. You are either the bravest fool I have ever met or the stupidest. Maybe both. Probably both, Draven agreed, and urged his horse toward the mountain trail. The ascent was brutal. The path narrowed to barely wide enough for a single horse. Ice covered everything, making each step treacherous. Wind howled through the peaks, carrying snow that stung like thrown glass. The air thinned until every breath felt like swallowing knives. Halfway up, Draven's horse refused to go further. The animal's eyes rolled white with fear, hooves scrambling on the ice. Draven dismounted and sent the horse back down the mountain before continuing on foot. His legs burned, his lungs screamed, frost formed on his beard and eyebrows. Every step was agony, but he kept climbing because turning back meant accepting that he had lost Lyanna forever. And Draven would rather die on this frozen mountain than accept that truth. The ruins of Valemore Keep appeared through the snow like a ghost rising from the storm. Crumbling stone walls covered in frost and ice. Shattered towers that once reached toward the sky, now broken and hollow. But smoke rose from somewhere deep inside the ruins, proof that life still existed in this frozen tomb. Draven approached slowly, every instinct screaming that he was about to cross a threshold he could never return from. The outer courtyard was filled with wolves. Not soldiers, not warriors, not the disciplined ranks he commanded in Raverin. Rogues. Children with matted fur and hollow eyes that had seen too much suffering. Omegas scarred by abuse, their bodies bearing marks of violence that made Draven's stomach turn. Alphas who looked like they had been broken by the world and barely survived, their dominance shattered into something quiet and wounded. They moved through the courtyard carrying firewood, mending clothes, preparing food over open flames. Working together without the rigid pack hierarchy that governed every interaction in the Empire. And every single one of them stopped when Draven entered. The scent of an Alpha King was unmistakable, impossible to hide or disguise. It rolled off him in waves, announcing his presence more effectively than any herald. A young Omega dropped the water bucket she was carrying, the sound echoing through the courtyard like a gunshot. Water splashed across frozen stone. An older Alpha, with a missing eye and deep scars across his throat, stepped protectively in front of a group of children, his teeth bared despite the fact that challenging Draven would be suicide. Fear rippled through the courtyard. These were wolves who had been hurt by alphas before, broken by pack law, destroyed by dominance games and power struggles, and now another alpha had found them. Then a voice cut through the tension like a blade. Stand down! Every wolf in the courtyard immediately obeyed, lowering their eyes and stepping back, their fear transforming into something that looked like trust. Draven turned toward the voice, and his entire world stopped. Lyanna Vey stood in the entrance of the main hall, snowfall drifting around her like she commanded the storm itself. She wore silver robes lined with wolf fur, the fabric falling in elegant folds that spoke of someone who had learned to carry authority without needing crowns or thrones. Her hair was longer than he remembered, braided with small bones and frost-white flowers that looked like they grew from the ice itself. Her silver-gray eyes burned with an authority that had not existed 3 years ago when she walked away from the Empire. She looked powerful, she looked whole, she looked happy, and the sight nearly destroyed him. Because Draven realized in that moment what his arrogance had done, what his pride had cost, what he had thrown away because he was too stupid and too blinded by power to recognize the truth. Lyanna had not needed him to become strong. She had needed to escape him. His love had come with conditions he never acknowledged. Obey me, stand behind me, need me, validate my power, make me feel strong by being weak. But real love demanded something far more painful and far more difficult. Respect, equality, the humility to admit when you are wrong. Lyanna dismissed the other wolves with a gesture, and they obeyed instantly, disappearing into the ruins like shadows called back to darkness. She stood alone in the courtyard, 20 feet separating them, and Draven felt the dormant mate bond roar violently back to life. The pain hit both of them simultaneously. Lyanna's hand went to her chest, her breath catching audibly. Her eyes went wide. Draven staggered like he had been struck by a warhammer, his vision blurring, his knees threatening to buckle. The bond was still there, shattered, broken, dormant for 3 years, but still there, still connecting them despite everything, still hurting worse than any wound. "What are you doing here?" Lyanna asked, her voice cold enough to freeze blood. Draven forgot every speech he had prepared during the journey north, every carefully constructed apology, every perfectly worded explanation, every argument he had rehearsed in his head while climbing the mountain. Because none of them mattered against the truth. "I came to beg forgiveness." The courtyard went silent, except for the wind howling through the ruins and the distant sound of children laughing somewhere deep inside the sanctuary. Lyanna stared at him like he had just spoken a language she did not understand, like the words coming out of his mouth were impossible, like an alpha king begging was so unnatural it violated the fundamental laws of their world. And it was. Alphas did not beg, kings did not kneel, rulers did not admit mistakes. But Draven no longer cared about any of that. Because kings spend their lives believing that kneeling makes them weak, that admitting fault destroys their authority, that showing vulnerability is the same as showing defeat. Then one day they meet the person worth kneeling for, and suddenly, none of the old rules matter anymore. "You humiliated me in front of your court," Lyanna whispered, her voice shaking with barely contained emotion. "You made me feel small for loving you. You made me feel weak for caring about people you considered beneath your concern. You told me I was not strong enough to stand beside you." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Every word hit harder than any battle Draven had ever fought, harder than the war that nearly tore Ravaran apart, harder than the rebellions he crushed, harder than anything except the memory of watching her walk away. He could not defend himself because she was right. Every accusation, every wound, all of it true. "That crown poisoned me," Draven said quietly. "I kept thinking leadership meant becoming harder, colder, more brutal, untouchable. I thought if I loved you too openly, if I listened to your advice in front of the generals, if I admitted that an Omega understood politics better than my war council, then they would see weakness." He took one step closer. "So I shut you out. I ignored your warnings about the starving districts because the nobles said you were being dramatic. I dismissed your concerns about corruption because the generals said you did not understand how empires work. I chose the advice of wolves who told me what I wanted to hear over the woman who told me what I needed to know." Another step. "I told myself I was protecting the empire, but the truth is I was protecting my own arrogance. I was terrified that if I admitted you were right about the corruption, about the cruelty, about the rot spreading through Ravaran like a disease, then I would have to admit I was wrong." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "And kings are not supposed to be wrong." Lyanna's eyes glistened, but she did not let the tears fall. She had learned how to control her emotions, how to keep her pain private. "And now I know that losing you was the weakest thing I have ever done. Now I know that every decision I made after you left was wrong. The rebellions you warned me about happened exactly as you predicted. The nobles I trusted betrayed me exactly as you said they would. The empire you told me was rotting from the inside collapsed exactly the way you described." Draven's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You were right about everything, and I was too arrogant to listen." The wind howled through the ruins, snow swirling between them in patterns that looked almost alive. Lyanna crossed her arms, her expression hardening into something that resembled armor. "You think you can just show up here after 3 years and everything will be forgiven? You think an apology erases the fact that you chose power over me? That you threw away everything we had because your pride mattered more than our bond?" Her voice rose. "You destroyed me, Draven. You took the person I was and you broke her into pieces. You made me question everything about myself. Made me think I was weak for caring. Made me feel like love was something shameful that had to be hidden. No, Draven said simply. I do not think any of that. I know I do not deserve forgiveness. I know I shattered something sacred that can never be fully repaired. I know I failed you in every way that matters. He dropped to one knee in the snow. The Alpha King of Ravaran, the most feared ruler on the continent, the wolf who had conquered nations and destroyed armies, knelt in the ruins of a forgotten sanctuary before the woman he destroyed. Gasps echoed from the shadows where the other wolves were hiding and watching. But I am here anyway, Draven continued, his voice raw with emotion he had spent 3 years trying to bury. Because living without you is not living. It is just existing in a tomb made of gold and obsidian and empty victories. Because the Empire means nothing if you are not in it. Because I would trade the throne itself. I would burn Reverin to the ground. I would give up everything I have spent my life building if it meant undoing that night in the war chamber. Lyanna stared down at him, her breath coming faster, visible in the frozen air. Get up. No. Draven, get up, not until you hear me. Not until you understand that I am not here as a king trying to reclaim his property. I am here as a man who destroyed the best thing in his life and has spent every day since then drowning in regret. She took a step back, shaking her head. Her composure was cracking. I do not want to hear this. I do not want your apologies or your regret or your pain. I built a life here. I found peace. I found purpose. Her voice broke. For the first time in my life, I am not afraid. I am not small. I am not standing in someone's shadow, waiting for permission to matter. These wolves look at me and see a leader, not a weakness to be exploited. They trust me because I have never given them a reason not to. She gestured toward the ruins around them. You taught me that I was not enough, Draven. You taught me that love was conditional, that my worth depended on how well I could disappear when the Empire demanded it. You taught me that caring about people was a flaw to be corrected. I was wrong, Draven said, his voice barely a whisper that somehow carried across the courtyard. I was wrong about everything. Lyanna looked away, tears finally spilling down her cheeks, freezing on her skin. You do not get to cry. You do not get to kneel in the snow and act like you are the victim here. You made your choice 3 years ago. You chose the throne. You chose power. You chose cruelty over compassion because that is what kings do. She turned back to him, her eyes blazing with pain and anger, and something that might have been longing. So go back to your empire, Draven. Go back to your wars and your generals and your obsidian throne. Go back to the life you chose over me. Go back to being the king who never needs anyone. Draven stayed on his knee, snow gathering on his shoulders, frost forming on his hair. What if I do not want that life anymore? Lyanna laughed, bitter and broken. Then you are a fool. Because that life is all you have. You made sure of that when you threw me away. Before Draven could respond, a young wolf stumbled into the courtyard, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder, his breath coming in ragged gasps that created clouds of steam in the frozen air. Moon Queen, the wolf choked out, collapsing to his knees in the snow. Soldiers, coming up the mountain, Ravaran banners, they are burning the lower villages, killing anyone who will not tell them where you are. Lyanna's expression shifted instantly from grief to cold calculation, from wounded woman to tactical leader in the span of a heartbeat. How many? At least 50. Maybe more. They are heavily armed, war-trained. They're saying the king abandoned his post and the noble council declared him unfit to rule. They want you dead. The young wolf looked at Draven with terror. They think killing the Moon Queen will force the king back to the capital. They think your death will solve their problem. Draven rose to his feet, rage flooding through him like wildfire, burning away everything except the need to protect. The council did what? The young wolf stared at him in horror, finally recognizing who he was looking at. Your Majesty, I did not... Where are they? Draven growled, his voice dropping to something barely human, something ancient and violent. The wolf pointed toward the lower slopes with a shaking hand. Maybe 10 minutes away. We do not have enough fighters. Most of us are healers or children or wolves too broken to fight. We cannot hold them off. Lyanna was already moving, shouting orders in a voice that carried across the entire sanctuary. Get the children into the inner chambers. Barricade the main doors. Anyone who can fight, arm yourselves with whatever you can find. Everyone else, hide. The courtyard erupted into controlled chaos. Rogues grabbed makeshift weapons. Omegas herded frightened children toward the stone halls deep inside the keep. Alphas who looked like they had not fought in years formed defensive lines with shaking hands. Draven grabbed Lyanna's arm. "Get underground. Hide with the children." She yanked her arm free with surprising strength, her eyes blazing. "This is my sanctuary. These are my wolves. I do not hide while they fight. They are coming to kill you specifically. Then they will have to go through me first." Draven stared at her, seeing the woman he fell in love with and the leader she had become merged into something fierce and unbreakable and utterly magnificent. "Fine," he said quietly. "Then they go through both of us." Lyanna opened her mouth to argue, but the sound of howling echoed up the mountain, followed by the unmistakable clash of steel against steel and the roar of flames consuming wood. The attack had begun, and Draven Kaelor, the Alpha King who once conquered nations through calculated strategy and overwhelming force, became something even more terrifying in that moment. A man fighting for the woman he failed once already. A king who had nothing left to lose except the one thing he should have protected from the beginning. Because there is no creature more dangerous than a ruler trying to redeem himself in blood, and no force more unstoppable than an alpha who has finally learned that some things matter more than empires. The first soldier who crested the ridge died before he could scream. Draven moved like violence given form, crossing the distance between the courtyard and the outer wall in 3 strides that should have been impossible for something human-shaped. His claws extended mid-leap, tearing through armor and flesh with the kind of efficiency that came from decades of combat. The soldier's body hit the snow in pieces. The others hesitated. That hesitation killed them. Because an Alpha King unleashed is not the same creature that sits on thrones and signs treaties. That version is controlled, calculated, restrained by politics and diplomacy and the weight of responsibility. This was something older, something that existed before crowns and councils and empire building. This was pure dominance stripped down to instinct and rage. Draven tore through the first wave like they were made of paper. Blood sprayed across pristine snow in arterial patterns. Screams cut off mid-sound as throats were ripped open. Weapons clattered uselessly against stone as the soldiers realized too late that they had not come to fight a king. They had come to die at the hands of a wolf, who finally had something worth protecting. Behind him, Lyanna's sanctuary wolves formed a defensive line across the courtyard entrance. They were not trained soldiers. Most looked like they had never held weapons before. But they stood their ground anyway because the Moon Queen had given them something worth defending. A place where being broken did not mean being worthless. Lyanna herself stood at the center of the line, a spear in her hands that she clearly knew how to use. Her silver robes were already stained with blood from the wounded wolf she had been treating when the attack began. She looked at Draven with an expression he could not read. Not gratitude, not relief. Something harder. Because watching the man who destroyed you commit violence on your behalf creates complicated emotions that do not have simple names. More soldiers poured over the ridge, at least 30 of them now, wearing the crimson and black of Ravaren's elite guard. These were not conscripts or border patrol. These were trained killers who had survived campaigns that would have broken lesser wolves. Their captain, a scarred alpha with dead eyes, surveyed the carnage Draven had created and showed no emotion. "Stand down!" the captain called out. "By order of the Noble Council of Ravaren, the Omega known as Lyanna Vey is declared an enemy of the state. Surrender her immediately and the rest of you will be spared." Draven stepped forward, positioning himself between the soldiers and the sanctuary. His hands dripped blood that steamed in the frozen air. His eyes had gone completely alpha, no humanity left in them, just predator instinct and territorial rage. "The council has no authority here," Draven said quietly. The captain's expression did not change. "The council has absolute authority. You abandoned your post. You were declared unfit to rule. Your commands no longer carry weight." Draven smiled, and it was not a pleasant thing to witness. "I am going to kill every single one of you," he said conversationally. "Not because of what the council ordered, not because you invaded this sanctuary, but because you threatened her." He gestured back toward Lyanna without taking his eyes off the captain. "And that is a crime that carries only one punishment." The captain signaled his troops. They attacked in formation, a coordinated assault designed to overwhelm through numbers and discipline. It might have worked against a normal alpha, might have succeeded against a rogue king past his prime, But Draven Kaelor was not normal, and he was nowhere near past his prime. He was an alpha king who had spent 3 years drowning in regret, and violence was the only language he still spoke fluently. The battle that followed was not strategic or elegant, it was butchery. Draven moved through the soldiers like a storm, his claws opening throats and his strength shattering bones with sounds like breaking branches. He fought with the kind of brutal efficiency that came from understanding exactly how fragile bodies were and exactly where to strike to end things quickly. But efficiency was not his goal. His goal was sending a message. Every soldier who got past him ran into Lyanna's defensive line and discovered that sanctuary wolves fought differently than military units. They fought dirty, desperate, without honor or rules or any concept of fair combat. Because wolves who have already lost everything fight like they have nothing left to lose. An Omega who could barely hold her makeshift spear stabbed a soldier through the eye when he tried to grab her. A teenager with a scarred face used his teeth when his weapon broke, tearing into an attacker's throat with feral desperation. An older alpha with trembling hands threw himself onto an enemy's sword to give the others time to retreat. It was chaos and blood and screaming. It was beautiful in the way that survival always is when the alternative is extinction. Lyanna fought at the center of the line, her spear moving with surprising skill. She had learned how to fight during her 3 years away from the Empire, learned how to protect instead of being protected. Every movement was precise, controlled, lethal when it needed to be. She caught Draven's eye across the battlefield for just a moment, and in that moment he saw the truth that had been staring him in the face since he arrived. Lyanna did not need rescuing. She needed a partner. The captain was the last one standing. He backed toward the ridge, his armor dented, his sword broken, blood leaking from a dozen wounds. But his expression remained cold, analytical, already calculating his report to the council. "This is not over," the captain said. "The council will send more soldiers, bigger forces. You cannot protect her forever." Draven crossed the distance between them in a single movement and grabbed the captain by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. "Tell the council something for me," Draven growled. "Tell them that if they send another soldier toward this sanctuary, I will burn the capital to the ground. Tell them that if they touch one hair on her head, I will execute every noble in their bloodlines. Tell them that the Alpha King they thought abandoned his throne has finally remembered what real power looks like." He squeezed until the captain's eyes bulged. "And it looks like protecting the things that matter instead of hoarding the things that do not." He threw the captain off the ridge. The soldier's scream echoed down the mountain until it cut off with a sound like a sack of meat hitting stone. Silence fell over the battlefield. Bodies littered the courtyard. Blood painted the snow in patterns that would take weeks to wash away. The sanctuary wolves stood among the carnage, breathing hard, staring at Draven with expressions that mixed fear and gratitude in equal measure, because they had just watched their protector's former mate commit violence that would give hardened soldiers nightmares. Draven turned to face Lyanna. She stood 20 feet away, her spear still in her hands, blood splattered across her silver robes. Her expression was unreadable. "You should not have come," she said quietly. "Probably not. You should not have killed them. Probably not. The council will retaliate. They will come with armies next time. Let them." Lyanna's grip tightened on her spear. "You cannot fight the entire empire, Draven. Watch me." She shook her head. "This is exactly what I left. This violence, this dominance, this idea that problems can be solved by being the biggest monster in the room." Draven met her eyes. "I'm not trying to be the biggest monster. I'm trying to protect you. I do not need your protection. I needed your respect. I needed you to see me as an equal instead of something fragile that required guarding." "I see you," Draven said, his voice rough. "I see exactly what you have become. I see the leader these wolves follow. I see the strength it took to build this place. I see everything I was too blind and too arrogant to notice 3 years ago." He gestured at the carnage around them. "But that does not change the fact that the council just sent 50 soldiers to kill you. That does not change the fact that they will keep coming. That does not change the fact that loving you means standing between you and the things trying to destroy you, whether you need me to or not." Lyanna's expression cracked slightly. "You think violence proves love?" "No," Draven said quietly. "But sometimes violence is the only language tyrants understand. And right now, the Council needs to understand that you are untouchable. Behind them, the sanctuary wolves began moving among the fallen, checking for survivors, treating the wounded. An older Omega approached Lyanna cautiously. "Moon Queen," the Omega said softly. "3 of ours are dead, 7 wounded. The children are terrified." Lyanna closed her eyes briefly, pain flashing across her face. "Take the wounded to the healing chambers. The children stay in the inner sanctuaries until I say otherwise." The Omega bowed and hurried away. Lyanna turned back to Draven, and the exhaustion on her face made her look suddenly vulnerable in a way that cut deeper than any weapon. "Do you see what you brought here?" she asked. "Death, fear. The same poison that infected the capital is now spreading to the one place I built to escape it. I brought protection. You brought war." "The war was already coming," Draven said. "The Council was always going to move against you. You represent everything they fear. A leader who rules through compassion instead of dominance. An Omega who commands respect without needing an Alpha to validate her authority. A woman who proves their entire system is built on lies." He stepped closer. "I am not the poison, Lyanna. I am just the only one willing to bleed to keep it away from you." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned and walked toward the main hall without another word. Draven stood alone in the courtyard, surrounded by the dead, and wondered if redemption always required destroying everything you touch before you learned how to protect it properly. The healing chambers deep inside Valemore Keep smelled like blood and medicinal herbs and fear. Lyanna moved among the wounded with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the exhaustion that lined her face. She stitched wounds that would scar, set bones that had shattered, whispered comfort to wolves who would wake up screaming for weeks. Draven watched from the doorway. She had not spoken to him since the battle ended 2 hours ago, had not looked at him, had not acknowledged his existence beyond occasionally moving around him like he was furniture. It hurt worse than the mate bond breaking. A young wolf on one of the healing tables whimpered as Lyanna cleaned a deep gash across his ribs. The boy could not have been more than 15, his face still carrying the softness of childhood despite the horror in his eyes. "You are going to be fine," Lyanna murmured. "The wound is clean. It will heal." "Will they come back?" the boy asked, his voice shaking. Lyanna hesitated for just a moment. "I do not know." "The Moon Queen never lies," an older wolf said from another table. "If she says she does not know, then the truth is uncertain." Draven stepped into the chamber. "They will come back." Every head turned toward him. Several wolves flinched. "The Council will not stop until they eliminate the threat you represent," Draven continued, looking at Lyanna. "They will send bigger forces, better trained, more brutal. They will burn the sanctuary to the ground if that is what it takes to prove that mercy is weakness and compassion is a flaw to be exploited." "So what do you suggest?" Lyanna asked without looking up from her patient. "That we abandon this place? Run? Hide in some other frozen wasteland and hope they do not find us again?" "No," Draven said. "I suggest we go to the capital and end this." The chamber went silent. Lyanna finally looked at him, her expression somewhere between disbelief and fury. "You want to attack Ravarin. You want to start a civil war. The civil war already started the moment I walked away from the throne. The Council has been consolidating power for months. They have been spreading propaganda that I abandoned my duties for an Omega who seduced me away from my responsibilities. They have turned the nobility against me and convinced half the military that I am unfit to rule." He crossed his arms. "The only question is whether we wait for them to hunt us down or whether we take the fight to them first." "We?" Lyanna repeated, her voice sharp. "There is no we. You do not get to show up after 3 years and start making decisions about my life. I am not making decisions for you. I am telling you what the Council is planning whether you like it or not. And how do you know what they are planning? Because I know those wolves. I know how they think. I know that they spent years telling me to get rid of you because you made me soft. I know they have been waiting for an opportunity to seize control ever since I put the crown on my head." Draven's voice hardened. "And I know that they will never stop coming for you as long as you represent proof that their entire worldview is wrong." Lyanna set down her medical supplies and stood slowly. "So your solution is to kill them all. My solution is to remove the threat permanently, by becoming the very thing I left, by using violence and dominance and fear to solve problems that require completely different approaches. What approach would you suggest? Draven asked. Diplomacy? Negotiation? Those only work when both sides want peace. The Council does not want peace. They want you dead and me back on the throne as a puppet they can control. Lyanna stepped closer, her eyes blazing. Then maybe the throne is not worth saving. Maybe Ravarin deserves to fall if its entire foundation is built on cruelty. It is not that simple. It is exactly that simple. You just do not want to admit that everything you built is rotten. The words hit like a physical blow. Draven stared at her, seeing the truth reflected in her eyes. She was right. The empire he spent his life building was diseased at its core. The system he enforced was designed to concentrate power in the hands of alphas, while treating everyone else as lesser. Lyanna had tried to tell him that 3 years ago, and he shut her out because hearing it meant admitting he was part of the problem. You are right, Draven said quietly. Lyanna blinked, clearly not expecting agreement. You are right about all of it, he continued. Ravarin is rotten. The nobility is corrupt. The system is designed to crush anyone who does not fit the mold. Everything you said 3 years ago was true, and I was too arrogant to listen. He moved closer until only a few feet separated them. But that does not change the fact that the council is coming. That does not change the fact that they will kill everyone in this sanctuary to prove a point. And that does not change the fact that I will burn the world to ash before I let them touch you again. Lyanna's breath caught. This is not love, Draven. This is obsession. Maybe, he admitted, maybe I am so broken by losing you that I cannot tell the difference anymore. Maybe 3 years of regret twisted something inside me that cannot be untwisted. Maybe you are right to push me away. He met her eyes. But obsessed or not, broken or not, I am still the only thing standing between you and an army. So you can hate me. You can reject me. You can tell me to leave and never come back, but I'm not going anywhere while you are in danger. Lyanna stared at him, emotions warring across her face. You do not get to decide that. I know. You do not get to appoint yourself my protector without my consent. I know. You do not get to fix what you broke by committing more violence. I know, Draven said softly, but I am going to do it anyway. Because the thing about hitting rock bottom is that it clarifies exactly what matters. And the only thing that matters is keeping you alive long enough for you to build the world you tried to create before I destroyed it. The silence stretched between them, heavy with 3 years of pain and unspoken words. One of the wounded wolves cleared his throat awkwardly. Should we leave? Stay, Lyanna said, without looking away from Draven. The king was just leaving. Draven held her gaze for another moment, then turned and walked out of the healing chamber. But he did not leave the sanctuary, because leaving meant abandoning her to whatever came next. And he had already made that mistake once. Fuck. Draven found Cade in the outer courtyard supervising the disposal of bodies. His second-in-command had arrived an hour after the battle ended, bringing 20 loyal soldiers who still answered to the king instead of the council. They worked quietly, efficiently, burning the enemy dead and preparing the sanctuary's fallen for proper burial. Cade approached when he saw Draven emerge from the main hall. The council is going to lose their minds, Cade said. Good. I am serious. They sent 50 elite guards and you killed them all. That is not a skirmish. That is a declaration of war. Then we are at war. Cade studied him carefully. You are really doing this. You are really choosing her over the Empire. I am choosing what matters over what I thought mattered. Draven looked at the sanctuary wolves moving through the courtyard. Children peeked out from doorways. Omegas tended small fires. Rogues worked together to reinforce defenses that would not hold against a real military assault. These wolves have nothing, Draven said. No pack, no protection, no value according to the system we built. But they followed her anyway because she saw worth where we only saw weakness. He turned back to Cade. What does that tell you about who was right all along? Cade was quiet for a moment. It tells me the Empire is more broken than we admitted. It tells me the Empire was always broken. We just benefited from it enough that we did not care. So what is the plan? Draven watched Lyanna emerge from the healing chambers and begin organizing supply distribution. Even exhausted and covered in blood, she moved with authority that came from genuine care rather than dominance. The plan is we hold this position until the council makes their next move. We fortify the sanctuary. We train anyone willing to fight. And we prepare for the possibility that this ends with Ravarin burning. Cade nodded slowly. And her? What about her? Does she want your help, or are we forcing protection on someone who would rather we left? Draven smiled bitterly. She wants me gone. She made that very clear. So why are we staying? Because what she wants and what she needs are not the same thing right now. And because walking away the first time nearly destroyed us both. I am not making that mistake twice. Even if she hates you for it? Especially if she hates me for it, Draven said. Love that requires gratitude is not love. It is transaction. And I am done treating her like something I own instead of someone I failed. Cade absorbed that. You have changed. I had to. The old version of me lost everything worth having. Before Cade could respond, a scout ran into the courtyard, breathing hard. Your Majesty, the scout gasped. Movement on the lower trails, at least 200 soldiers, maybe more. They are setting up siege positions. Draven's expression did not change. How long until they attack? Hours. Maybe less. They are bringing artillery, siege equipment. This is not another raid, this is an execution. Draven looked at Cade. Get everyone into the inner sanctuaries. Collapse the outer defenses. Make them work for every inch. And you? I am going to go have a conversation with whoever is commanding that army. You cannot be serious. They will kill you on sight. Probably, Draven agreed. But they are going to kill everyone here anyway, unless someone convinces them to reconsider. How do you plan to convince them? By reminding them what happens when you back an Alpha King into a corner and threaten the only thing he has left to lose. The commander of the siege force was a wolf Draven recognized. General Vance Corrin, one of the council's most loyal enforcers. A wolf who had built his career on brutal efficiency and unwavering obedience to whoever held power. He stood at the center of his encampment, surrounded by soldiers setting up siege weapons that would reduce Valemore Keep to rubble. When Draven walked into the camp alone and unarmed, every soldier reached for weapons. Stand down, Corrin ordered. Let him approach. Draven stopped 10 feet from the general. We need to talk. Corrin smiled coldly. The time for talking ended when you murdered 50 of my men. Your men were trying to kill civilians. The council declared the Omega an enemy of the state. My men were following orders. Orders from a council with no legitimate authority. Corrin's smile widened. The council has absolute authority now. You abandoned your throne. You were declared unfit. Your reign is over. My reign ends when I am dead. Until then, I am still the Alpha King of Ravarin. Draven let his dominance leak out, just enough that every soldier in earshot felt their instincts scream to submit. And as king, I am ordering you to stand down. Corrin did not flinch. Your orders mean nothing anymore. The nobility voted unanimously. The military command agreed. You are not a king. You are a rogue alpha who abandoned his duties for an omega who made you weak. He gestured at the siege weapons being assembled. This ends tonight. We will reduce that sanctuary to rubble. Everyone inside will die. And tomorrow, the council will install a new king who understands that empires are not built on mercy. Draven studied the general carefully. You know this is wrong. I know that order requires strength. Your weakness endangered the empire. My weakness was listening to wolves like you instead of the woman who actually understood how to lead. Corrin laughed. You mean the Omega who ran away the moment things got difficult? Who abandoned you just like you abandoned the throne? Draven's hands clenched into fists. She did not run. I drove her away. And everything that is happening now is a direct result of my failure to listen when she told me the truth. The truth being that empires built on dominance always collapse. That systems designed to crush compassion always breed rebellion. That you cannot rule through fear forever without eventually becoming the monster everyone fears. Corrin shook his head. You sound like her. Soft, weak, emotional. This is exactly why you needed to be removed. Then remove me, Draven said quietly. Let everyone in the sanctuary go. Come at me with your entire army. Prove you are strong enough to take down an Alpha King. Corrin's expression hardened. You think this is about you? This is about sending a message. Anyone who defies the council dies. Anyone who chooses sentiment over strength is eliminated. Your Omega and her collection of broken wolves are proof that the old system failed. His voice dropped. We are building something better, something pure, and that requires burning away everything weak. Draven stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I see. He turned and began walking back toward the sanctuary. That is it? Corrin called after him. No threats? No bargaining? Draven stopped and looked back over his shoulder. I gave you a chance to walk away. You chose war instead. What happens next is on you. The general smiled. What happens next is we crush your rebellion and restore order. Draven's expression did not change. You misunderstand. I am not leading a rebellion. Then what are you doing? I am protecting my mate, Draven said simply. And there is no force in this world powerful enough to stop an alpha who has finally figured out what actually matters. He continued walking, leaving the general standing among his siege weapons and his soldiers and his absolute certainty that might made right. Behind him, Draven heard Corrin give the order to prepare for assault. 2 hours until the siege began. 2 hours to decide whether to evacuate and let Lyanna's sanctuary burn or make a stand that would probably end with everyone dead. 2 hours to figure out if redemption was even possible when the cost was measured in blood. Draven made it back to the sanctuary as the sun began to set, painting the snow in shades of orange and red that looked disturbingly like fire. Lyanna stood on the outer wall, watching the army below prepare for slaughter. She did not look at him when he climbed up beside her. They are not going to negotiate, Draven said. I know. They are going to kill everyone. I know. We need to evacuate. Get the children out through the back tunnels. Scatter into the wilderness. And then what? Lyanna asked, still staring at the army below. We run forever? We build another sanctuary somewhere else and wait for them to find us again? She finally turned to look at him. This does not end until the system changes, and the system will not change as long as wolves like Corrin have power. So what are you suggesting? Lyanna's eyes burned with something fierce and unbreakable. I am suggesting we stop running. I am suggesting we make them understand that compassion is not weakness. I am suggesting we prove that a different way of leading is possible. By making a stand we cannot win? By making a stand that matters, she corrected. Even if we lose, even if we die, those children down there will remember that someone fought for them, that someone valued their lives enough to bleed for them. Her voice dropped. That is more than the Empire ever gave them. Draven stared at the woman he destroyed and the leader she became and felt something shift inside him. She was not asking him to protect her. She was asking him to stand beside her. Equal. Partner. Not as king and subject, but as wolves who finally understood that some fights matter more than survival. Then we make our stand, Draven said quietly. Lyanna nodded once. Then we make our stand. Below them, the siege weapons were almost ready. Above them, the first stars began appearing in a sky that would soon be filled with smoke and fire and the sound of everything they built falling apart. And between them, the mate bond that never fully died roared back to life with an intensity that burned worse than any wound. Because this was the point of no return. The moment where love stopped being about possession and became about sacrifice. The moment where two broken wolves decided that dying together for something that mattered was better than living separately with nothing left to believe in. The siege would begin in less than 2 hours, and neither of them planned to survive it. The first siege engine fired exactly 90 minutes after sunset. The projectile screamed through the darkness like a dying god, trailing fire and smoke before slamming into the outer wall of Valemore Keep. Stone exploded in a cloud of dust and shrapnel. The impact echoed across the mountain like thunder that refused to fade. Draven felt the vibration through his boots and knew immediately that the sanctuary would not survive the night. Not intact, not if General Corrin had his way. Around him, sanctuary wolves scrambled to defensive positions. Children were being ushered into the deepest chambers through tunnels that might collapse if the bombardment got heavy enough. Omegas carried supplies while trying not to let their terror show. Alphas who had not fought in years gripped makeshift weapons with shaking hands. This was not an army. This was a collection of broken wolves who had found something worth protecting and were about to die defending it. Lyanna stood at the center of the courtyard directing the chaos with calm efficiency. Her voice carried over the noise, steady and sure, giving orders that turned panic into purpose. She had changed into dark leather armor someone found in the old armory. It fit poorly, hung loose in places and tight in others, but she wore it like she had been born for battle. Draven watched her and understood something fundamental about leadership that he had missed during his entire reign. True authority does not come from dominance. It comes from being the person others choose to follow, even when following means dying. Another projectile hit the eastern tower. The ancient structure groaned but held. Barely. How long can we last? Cade asked, appearing at Draven's shoulder. Against sustained bombardment? Maybe 3 hours before the walls collapse completely. And then? Then they storm what is left and kill everyone they find. Cade nodded grimly. Your Omega knows this is suicide. She is not my Omega, Draven said quietly. She is her own person who happens to be my mate. And yes, she knows exactly what this is. So why are we doing it? Because some stands matter more than survival. Because history remembers the wolves who refused to bow more than it remembers the ones who lived long, empty lives in cages. Draven turned to look at his second-in-command. And because she asked me to stand beside her. Not behind her, not in front of her. Beside her. As equals. Cade absorbed that. You really have changed. I had 3 years to learn what actually matters. Turned out I was wrong about almost everything. Another impact shook the foundations. Dust rained from the ceiling. Somewhere deeper in the keep, a child screamed before being shushed by desperate mothers. Draven was about to give orders to reinforce the western wall when one of his soldiers ran into the courtyard, face pale, eyes wide with something that looked like horror. Your Majesty, the soldier gasped. We have a problem. If it is about the siege, I already know. No, the soldier said. It is about Commander Theron. Draven went cold. What about Cade? He is gone. We found his quarters empty, his weapons are missing, and 3 of our supply wagons have been sabotaged. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Draven turned slowly to look at where Cade had been standing just moments ago. Empty space. His second-in-command had vanished like smoke. Search the entire sanctuary, Draven ordered, his voice deadly calm. Find him now. But even as he said it, he knew the truth settling into his chest like a blade between ribs. Cade had not disappeared. Cade had left. And wolves did not abandon their posts during sieges unless they were running towards something more valuable than loyalty. They found the evidence in Cade's quarters 15 minutes later. Letters. Dozens of them. All correspondence with the Noble Council over the past 3 months. Detailed reports about Draven's movements, information about the sanctuary's location, strategic assessments of its defenses. Cade had been feeding intelligence to the council since before Draven even left the capital. Maybe longer. Draven stood in the small room reading words written in handwriting he had trusted for years, and felt something fundamental crack inside him. The king grows weaker by the day. His obsession with the Omega has compromised his judgment. He speaks of abandoning the throne entirely. I believe he is no longer fit to rule. I have confirmed the Omega's location. Frostvale Mountains, Valemore Keep. She has gathered rogues and outcasts, approximately 60 wolves total, minimal defenses. A single strike would eliminate the problem permanently. The king has left the capital. I am maintaining appearances but will join your forces when the assault begins. He trusts me completely. When the time comes, I will ensure he is isolated and vulnerable. Lyanna appeared in the doorway. She took one look at Draven's face and knew. How bad? She asked quietly. Everything, Draven said, his voice hollow. He gave them everything. For how long? Months. Maybe since the beginning. Lyanna stepped into the room and took one of the letters. Her expression hardened as she read. He was always going to betray you. Apparently. The question is why? Draven laughed bitterly. Because I became exactly what the council feared. A king who put people above power. An alpha who valued an Omega's judgment over military strategy. A ruler who started questioning whether the empire was worth preserving if it required grinding the weak into dust. He looked at Lyanna. Cade spent his entire career believing that strength was the only currency that mattered. When I changed, when I started listening to the things you tried to tell me 3 years ago, he saw weakness. And weakness needed to be eliminated, so he sold us out. He sold me out. You were just collateral damage. Another siege engine fired. The walls shuddered. Cracks spiderwebbed through stone that had stood for centuries. Lyanna set down the letter. This changes the tactical situation. Draven raised an eyebrow. That is your response? Not anger? Not fear? I am furious, Lyanna said coldly, and terrified. But fury and fear do not change the fact that we now have a traitor who knows our defenses, our numbers, and our supply situation, feeding information directly to the general commanding the siege. She met his eyes. We were already losing. Now we are guaranteed to lose unless we adapt. What do you suggest? Lyanna walked to the window and stared out at the fires burning below where Corrin's army prepared for the final assault. I suggest we give them exactly what they expect, which is desperation, chaos, a sanctuary falling apart from within. Draven studied her carefully. You have a plan, the beginnings of one. But it requires trusting me completely. It requires you letting go of control and following my lead without question. She turned to face him. Can you do that? Can the Alpha King of Ravarin take orders from an Omega he once told was not strong enough to stand beside him? The question hung in the air between them like a challenge. This was the test, not the siege, not the army outside, not even Cade's betrayal. This was the moment where Draven had to prove whether he had actually changed or whether his apologies were just words meant to soothe guilt. Yes, he said simply. Lyanna blinked. That is it? No argument? No need to discuss strategy first? You were right about the Empire. You were right about the corruption. You were right about everything I refused to hear 3 years ago. So yes, I will follow your lead. He stepped closer. Tell me what you need. 20 minutes later, Draven stood in the courtyard addressing the sanctuary wolves while fire rained down around them. Listen to me, he called out. All of you. The wolves gathered despite the bombardment, despite their fear, despite knowing that standing in the open made them targets. Some of you know who I am, Draven continued. The Alpha King. The ruler who built an empire on dominance and blood. The wolf who crushed rebellions and destroyed anyone who opposed him. He let the words settle. I was wrong about everything. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Because rulers who think about maintaining power rarely think about the people being crushed beneath that power. Leaders who believe strength is the only thing that matters eventually become monsters who mistake cruelty for competence. He gestured toward Lyanna, standing beside him. This woman tried to tell me the truth 3 years ago. She begged me to listen when the Omega districts were starving. She warned me when the Noble Council was growing corrupt. She saw the rot spreading through Ravarin long before I admitted it existed. His voice hardened. And I destroyed her for it. I told her she was weak. I told her she did not understand how empires work. I chose the advice of generals who lied to my face over the woman who loved me enough to tell me painful truths. The bombardment continued, but no one moved. Tonight, we make a stand against the system that created wolves like the version of me I used to be. Tonight, we prove that a different way of leading is possible. Tonight, we show the Empire that compassion is not weakness. He paused. And we do it by following her. Draven stepped back, yielding the center position to Lyanna. She stood there for a moment, clearly not expecting this. Then she lifted her chin and addressed the crowd with the same authority she used to organize healing chambers and supply distribution. We are going to lose this battle, she said bluntly. More gasps. The army outside has superior numbers, better weapons, and siege equipment designed to reduce stone to rubble. They have wolves trained since childhood to kill without hesitation. We have refugees who barely know how to hold weapons. She let that sink in. But losing the battle does not mean losing the war, because wars are not won by who has the biggest army. They are won by who has the better story. And our story is simple. Her voice carried across the courtyard. We are wolves who refused to bow when the Empire demanded submission. We are outcasts who built something beautiful in the ruins of what they destroyed. We are proof that strength without compassion is just violence wearing a crown. She pointed toward the army below. They want to erase us because we remind them that their entire system is built on lies. That alphas are not inherently superior. That omegas are not weak. That rogues are not worthless. Every day we exist is proof that everything they believe is wrong. Lyanna's eyes blazed. So tonight, We do not fight to win. We fight to make sure they never forget what they had to do to silence us. We fight so that every soldier down there goes home knowing they murdered children to preserve a system designed to crush hope. She smiled grimly. That guilt will spread. That doubt will infect their ranks. And eventually, the Empire will collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. The wolves stared at her with something approaching reverence. This was leadership without dominance, authority without force, power that came from being worth following instead of being too dangerous to oppose. Here's what we are going to do, Lyanna continued. The children and anyone too wounded to fight will evacuate through the northern tunnels. We have maps, supplies, guides who know the wilderness. She looked at an older Omega. Mira, you will lead them. Get as far from here as possible. If we fall, you rebuild somewhere else. You teach the children that another way was possible. You make sure our story survives. The Omega nodded, tears streaming down her face. Everyone else, Lyanna said, we hold the walls as long as possible. We make them pay for every inch. We show them that wolves who fight for something they believe in are worth 10 who fight because they were ordered to. She paused. And when the walls fall, we collapse the main hall. We bury the armory. We destroy everything they came to capture. Draven understood immediately. She was denying them the victory. Even if they took the sanctuary, they would find nothing but rubble and defiance. A young alpha raised his hand. What about you, Moon Queen? Lyanna smiled sadly. I will be exactly where I am supposed to be, standing beside all of you. The wolves began moving to their positions, determination replacing fear, purpose replacing panic. Draven watched them go and felt something shift fundamentally in his understanding of what it meant to lead. Lyanna turned to him. You are sure about this? Once we start, there is no going back. I crossed that line the moment I knelt in your courtyard and begged forgiveness. Everything since then has been trying to become the wolf I should have been from the beginning. She studied his face. You might die tonight. Probably. Does that scare you? Draven considered the question honestly. 3 years ago, death terrified me because I had not accomplished enough, had not conquered enough, had not proven myself sufficiently. And now? Now I am more afraid of dying without having fixed what I broke. Lyanna's expression softened slightly. You cannot fix everything in one night, no. But I can stand beside you when the world tries to destroy what you built. And maybe that is enough. Before she could respond, a runner burst into the courtyard. The assault is beginning, infantry moving up the mountain, siege engines increasing fire rate. Lyanna nodded. Signal the evacuation. Get the children out now. The runner disappeared. Draven and Lyanna climbed to the battlements and watched the army below surge forward like a wave of violence and certainty. This was it. The moment where everything changed or everything ended. The moment where two wolves who had destroyed each other made one final stand for something that mattered more than either of them. The soldiers hit the outer wall like a battering ram made of flesh and steel. Muck. The battle that followed was not heroic or glorious or any of the things songs describe. It was butchery. Corrin's forces attacked in disciplined waves, each one testing the defenses, probing for weakness, grinding down the sanctuary wolves through sheer attrition. They had the numbers, they had the training, they had siege equipment that made walls meaningless. The sanctuary wolves fought with the desperate ferocity of creatures defending the only home they had ever known. They threw everything they had at the attackers. Makeshift weapons, burning oil, rocks torn from the crumbling walls. It was not enough. The eastern wall fell within the first hour. Soldiers poured through the breach like infection through a wound. Draven met them with the kind of violence that would have made his younger self proud and his current self sick. He tore through attackers with efficiency born from decades of conquest, but there were always more. For every soldier he killed, 3 more appeared. Lyanna fought beside him, her spear moving with deadly precision. She had learned to kill during her years away from the Empire. Learned where to strike to end things quickly, learned how to turn an opponent's strength against them. She was magnificent and terrible, and everything Draven never deserved. The second wall fell before midnight. Sanctuary wolves began falling back to the inner keep, carrying their wounded, leaving their dead. The courtyard they had defended filled with enemy soldiers who showed no mercy to anyone they caught. Draven heard screaming from somewhere deep in the keep and knew that some of the children had not evacuated in time. The sound nearly broke him. This was what his empire had become. Soldiers murdering children to prove a political point. He found Corin directing the assault from the captured courtyard, surrounded by his elite guard. The general smiled when he saw Draven approaching. "Still breathing?" Corin called out. "I am almost impressed." Draven was covered in blood. His armor was shredded. Wounds leaked across his chest and arms, but he stood steady despite exhaustion that went bone deep. "Call off the assault," Draven said. "The children are evacuating. Let them go. The children are future problems. We eliminate problems permanently. They are innocent. There is no innocence in war. Only winners and corpses." Draven moved closer, his hands empty of weapons. "Then let them go and I will surrender. You can drag me back to the capital, execute me publicly, give the council their victory." Corin laughed. "You think this is about you? This is about erasing proof that your way of thinking has any validity. The Omega lives, and somewhere a rogue thinks maybe compassion could work. The sanctuary survives, and somewhere a broken wolf thinks maybe they deserve dignity." His expression hardened. "We cannot allow that hope to exist." Before Draven could respond, Cade stepped out from behind the general. His former second-in-command looked exactly as he always had, calm, controlled, utterly certain of his choices. "Hello, old friend," Cade said. Draven stared at the wolf he had trusted more than anyone except Lyanna. "Why?" Cade shrugged. "Because you changed into something weak, something I did not recognize. The Draven Kaelor I followed would have crushed this sanctuary without hesitation, would have executed the Omega for daring to question his authority. That version of me was a monster. That version of you was a king. This version is a traitor to everything we built. We built an empire on corpses and called it civilization," Draven said quietly. "We crushed anyone who did not fit the mold and called it strength. We created a system designed to reward cruelty and punish compassion." "Exactly," Cade said. "And it worked. Raverin became the most powerful empire on the continent, and the most hollow, the most corrupt, the most diseased." Cade's expression did not change. Better a strong empire that survives than a compassionate one that collapses. Behind them, the keep continued burning. Soldiers dragged out sanctuary wolves and executed them in the courtyard. Screams echoed through the ruins. Draven looked at his former friend and understood finally what Lyanna had been trying to tell him 3 years ago. Some wolves would never change. Some wolves were so invested in the old system that even watching it destroy everything they touched would not convince them to question their beliefs. Cade was one of those wolves, and Draven had spent decades being another. "You are going to lose," Cade said. "Tonight, tomorrow, eventually. Because compassion always loses to strength, always has, always will." "Maybe," Draven admitted, "but at least I will die knowing I tried to become something better than the monster I was." He turned away from his former friend and found Lyanna fighting desperately to hold the entrance to the inner sanctuaries where the last evacuating children were fleeing through hidden tunnels. She was surrounded, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Her spear was broken, her armor was shredded. But she stood her ground because children were behind her, and standing was the only choice that mattered. Draven crossed the courtyard in seconds and threw himself into the soldiers attacking her. His claws found throats, his teeth found arteries, his strength scattered attackers like they weighed nothing. He fought his way to her side and they stood back to back while the world burned around them. "You should run," Lyanna gasped. "Save yourself. Not a chance. Draven, you are going to die here. Then I die standing beside you. That is more than I deserve." She laughed, bitter and breathless. "You are an idiot." "I know." The soldiers pressed closer. There were too many. Even an Alpha King had limits. This was how it ended, in fire and blood and defiance. Then something impossible happened. The soldiers stopped advancing. Confused shouts echoed across the courtyard. Orders screamed by officers who suddenly lost control of their troops. The organized assault dissolved into chaos. Draven looked past the immediate attackers and saw something that made no sense. Corin's army was turning on itself. Soldiers fighting soldiers, officers being dragged from their horses, entire units breaking formation and fleeing back down the mountain. "What is happening?" Lyanna whispered. Draven had no answer. Then he saw them. Wolves pouring up the mountain from the southern approaches, hundreds of them. maybe thousands. Not soldiers, not military units. Rogues, omegas, outcasts. Every broken wolf who had ever heard stories about the Moon Queen and the sanctuary she built in the frozen north. Every refugee who had been turned away from Packlands. Every survivor of the Empire's cruelty who thought they were alone. They had come, not to conquer, not to dominate, to protect the one place that had ever offered them dignity. At the front of the wave rode someone Draven recognized, the old wolf from the village, the one whose grandson died in Draven's wars, the one who wished the journey north would destroy him. The old wolf met Draven's eyes across the burning courtyard and nodded once. Not forgiveness, understanding. Because sometimes you do not forgive the monsters who hurt you. Sometimes you just help them become something better. Because the alternative is letting the cruelty continue. Khorne's forces broke completely. They were trained to fight organized resistance. They had no defense against a flood of desperate wolves who fought like they had nothing left to lose. The general himself tried to rally his troops, but the old wolf reached him first. What followed was not a fight. It was an execution. Justice delivered by someone who had earned the right to it. When it was over, when the last of Khorne's soldiers had fled or fallen, Draven stood in the ruins of the courtyard surrounded by wolves who should have hated him. Instead, they just looked tired. The old wolf approached slowly. Your Omega called for help, sent runners to every rogue pack within a week's travel, told them what was happening here. She is not my Omega, Draven said automatically. The old wolf smiled faintly. She told us you would say that too. Lyanna stepped forward, leaning heavily on Draven for support. Thank you for coming. We did not come for you, the old wolf said bluntly. We came for the idea you represent, the idea that maybe broken wolves still deserve a place to exist without being crushed. He looked at Draven, and maybe, just maybe, even kings can learn that cruelty is not the same thing as strength. Draven had no response to that. Around them, sanctuary wolves emerged from hiding. Children crept out of tunnels. Healers began tending the wounded from both sides because that was what Lyanna taught them. Mercy is not weakness, it is the hardest choice warriors ever make. Cade was found trying to flee down the mountain. They brought him back to the courtyard in chains and threw him at Draven's feet. The Alpha King stared down at his former friend and felt nothing but exhaustion. What do you want us to do with him? One of the rogues asked. Draven looked at Lyanna. Your sanctuary, your choice. She studied Cade for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would have gotten her killed in the old empire. Let him go. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Lyanna met Cade's shocked expression. You sold us out because you thought compassion was weakness. Killing you now would prove your point. So instead, you get to live with the knowledge that the wolves you tried to destroy showed you more mercy than you ever showed anyone. She gestured toward the mountain path. Go. Tell the council what happened here. Tell them that their empire is dying. Tell them that a different way is possible. Cade stared at her like she was speaking a foreign language. Then he stood slowly and walked toward the path, looking back once with an expression Draven could not read. Then he was gone. And Draven understood finally what Lyanna had been trying to teach him from the beginning. Real strength is not about how much violence you can commit. It is about how much mercy you can afford. The wolves began clearing the dead and tending the wounded. The sanctuary was destroyed. The walls were rubble. The main hall was collapsed. But the idea survived. And ideas are harder to kill than buildings. Lyanna collapsed against Draven, her strength finally giving out. He caught her and lowered her gently to the ground while a healer rushed over. You saved us, Draven said quietly. No, Lyanna whispered. We saved each other. Then her eyes closed and the healer pushed him aside to work. Draven stood in the ruins of everything he thought he knew and understood that this was not an ending. This was a transformation. The Alpha King who valued power above all else had died in that courtyard. What emerged was something new. Something that did not have a name yet. Something that would have to learn how to exist in a world where the old rules no longer applied and the new ones had not been written. The sun rose over Valemore Keep, painting the destruction in shades of gold and red. And Draven Kaelor, former ruler of the greatest empire on the continent, knelt in the ashes beside the woman who destroyed his certainty and rebuilt his capacity for growth. The empire would retaliate eventually. The council would send more soldiers. The nobility would demand blood. But none of that mattered as much as the fundamental truth settling into Draven's bones like marrow. He could not go back to being the king he was. He could only move forward as the wolf he was becoming. And that wolf needed to burn down everything the old king built before something new could grow in its place. Lyanna did not wake for 3 days. She lay in one of the few intact chambers deep inside Valemore Keep while healers worked around the clock to keep her breathing. The wounds covering her body were severe but survivable. What worried them more was the exhaustion that went deeper than flesh and bone. Her spirit had been pushed past breaking and needed time to rebuild itself. Draven did not leave her side except when forced. He sat beside her bed, watching her chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. Each one a small victory against the death that had come so close to claiming her. His own wounds had been stitched and bandaged, but he barely noticed the pain. Physical damage was easy compared to the gnawing fear that she might never open her eyes again. The old wolf found him there on the second night. The grizzled rogue stood in the doorway for a moment before entering, his walking stick tapping against stone worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. "She will live," the old wolf said. It was not a question. The healers say she should, but should and will are not the same thing. The old wolf lowered himself into a chair with the careful movements of someone whose body had endured too many winters. "My wife used to say that some people survive out of spite. They refuse to die because that would mean their enemies were right about them being weak." Draven glanced at him. "You think Lyanna is surviving out of spite?" "I think she is surviving because too many wolves depend on her dying to prove a point, and she has never been good at giving people what they expect." A faint smile crossed Draven's face. "No, she never has been." They sat in silence for a while, listening to Lyanna's breathing and the distant sounds of reconstruction happening throughout the ruined sanctuary. Wolves who had come to fight were now staying to rebuild. Rogues who had never belonged anywhere were creating something new in the ashes. "The council will not stop," the old wolf said eventually. "You know that." "I know. They will see what happened here as rebellion that needs crushing. They will send more soldiers, bigger armies. They will burn the entire mountain range if that is what it takes to erase proof that their way is not the only way." Draven nodded. "I know that too. So what are you going to do about it?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the fires still smoldering outside. Draven looked at Lyanna's sleeping face, at the woman who had tried to save him from himself 3 years ago, and felt something fundamental shift in his understanding of what leadership actually meant. "I am going to give them exactly what they want," he said quietly. "I am going to return to Ravarin." The old wolf's expression did not change. To surrender, to burn it down. Now the old wolf's eyebrows rose. "You plan to destroy your own empire?" "It is not my empire anymore. It stopped being mine the moment I realized it was built on foundations designed to crush anyone who did not fit the mold. The moment I understood that maintaining power required committing atrocities I could no longer justify." Draven stood and walked to the window, staring out at the mountain wilderness where wolves who should have been enemies were working together to create something that had never existed before. An empire without hierarchy. A kingdom without kings. A society where strength meant protecting the vulnerable instead of exploiting them. "The council thinks this is about me wanting the throne back," Draven continued. "They think I abandoned my post because an Omega seduced me into weakness. They think killing Lyanna will solve their problem by removing the source of my distraction. And in reality, Lyanna showed me that the entire system is diseased. That empires built on dominance always rot from the inside. That rulers who measure success by how much they control eventually become the very monsters they claim to oppose." He turned back to face the old wolf. "So I'm going to do what should have been done generations ago. I'm going to dismantle the power structures that allow wolves like the version of me I used to be to commit violence and call it governance." The old wolf studied him carefully. "That is treason. That is evolution. Systems that cannot change deserve to collapse. You will die attempting this." "Probably," Draven agreed. "But dying while trying to fix what I broke is better than living with the knowledge that I let the cruelty continue because changing it was too difficult." The old wolf was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "My grandson would have liked the wolf you are becoming. He always said the empire needed rulers who cared more about people than power." His voice roughened. "He was 16 when your war killed him. 16 years old and full of ideas about how to make the world better. Your generals sent him to die for territory that changed hands 3 times in the following year. I know, Draven said quietly, and I'm sorry. Sorry does not resurrect the dead. No. But maybe preventing more deaths gives his sacrifice meaning it did not have before. The old wolf stood slowly, leaning heavily on his walking stick. When do you leave? As soon as Lyanna wakes. I need to know she will survive before I walk into something I definitely will not. And if she tries to stop you, then I will ask her to trust that I finally learned the lessons she tried to teach me 3 years ago. That some things matter more than survival. That mercy is not weakness. That tearing down a corrupt system is harder and more important than maintaining it. Draven looked at her sleeping form, and that loving someone means protecting the world they are trying to build, even if you do not get to see it finished. Sight. Lyanna woke on the 3rd day with Draven's name on her lips. Her eyes snapped open and she tried to sit up before pain lanced through her body and forced her back down. Every muscle screamed, every wound burned. Her head felt like someone had taken a hammer to it repeatedly. But she was alive. Draven was beside her instantly, his hands gentle as he helped her settle back against the pillows. Easy, he said. You have been unconscious for 3 days. Your body needs time to heal. Lyanna's voice came out as a rasp. The children? Safe. The evacuation worked. Most of them made it out before the fighting reached the inner chambers. The sanctuary? Destroyed, but being rebuilt by about 300 rogues who decided this was worth staying for. She absorbed that. And you? Still breathing, still trying to figure out how to fix everything I broke. Lyanna studied his face, seeing exhaustion and determination in equal measure. You are planning something stupid. Probably. Draven. He met her eyes. I'm going back to Reverend. I'm going to end this. Her hand shot out and grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. That is suicide. Maybe, but staying here means waiting for the council to send another army, and another, and another. Eventually they will overwhelm us through sheer numbers. So your solution is to walk into the capital alone and hope they do not kill you immediately? My solution is to force the council to face me publicly, to make them justify their actions in front of the entire empire, to expose the corruption they have been hiding behind laws and traditions and convenient lies. Lyanna's grip tightened. They will execute you. Then I die proving that the empire values maintaining power over pursuing truth. That becomes part of the story. That becomes ammunition for everyone who comes after me. You cannot build a better world if you are dead. No, Draven admitted. But I can create the conditions for someone else to build it. And right now, the biggest obstacle to change is the belief that the old system is unbreakable. Someone needs to break it. Lyanna pulled him closer, her silver eyes fierce despite the exhaustion lining her face. So you plan to martyr yourself and think that solves anything? I plan to do what I should have done 3 years ago when you begged me to listen. I plan to choose what is right over what is easy. I plan to stop being the kind of ruler who prioritizes his own survival over the well-being of the people he claims to protect. His voice softened. I plan to finally become the wolf you deserved, instead of the monster I was. Lyanna's eyes glistened. You stupid, arrogant, self-sacrificing fool. I know. You think dying fixes what you did to me? To us? No. But living while knowing I could have stopped this and chose not to would destroy what is left of my soul. They stared at each other, the mate bond that never fully died burning between them with intensity that was painful and necessary in equal measure. Then I am coming with you, Lyanna said. Absolutely not. You do not get to make that choice for me. You can barely stand. You need weeks to recover. I needed years to recover from what you did to me in that war chamber, Lyanna said coldly. I managed. I will manage this too. Draven opened his mouth to argue, but she cut him off. You want to dismantle the empire? You want to expose the council's corruption? You want to prove that a different way is possible? Then you need me beside you, because I am the living proof that your old way failed. I am the Omega they said was too weak to matter who built something that survived their best attempt to destroy it. Her grip on his wrist was like iron. I am the evidence that compassion works, that mercy has value, That wolves they discarded as worthless can create societies more functional than anything the Empire ever produced. She pulled him down until their faces were inches apart. So if you're going to walk into that capital and challenge everything they believe, you are doing it with me beside you, not behind you, not protected by you, beside you as an equal. Draven stared at her and felt the last pieces of his old identity crumble. This was what he had failed to understand 3 years ago. Lyanna did not need rescuing. She needed a partner who recognized her strength instead of trying to shield her from the world. "All right," he said quietly. "Together." "Together," she agreed. Then she pulled him into a kiss that tasted like blood and medicine and 3 years of grief finally finding resolution. When they broke apart, Lyanna's expression had shifted into something tactical. "How many wolves can we count on?" "The rogues who stayed number around 300. Most are not trained fighters, but they are motivated. The old wolf commands respect among them. They will follow if he asks." "And your former soldiers?" "Maybe 20 still loyal to me personally instead of whoever controls the throne. The rest either fled or joined the council's forces. So we are looking at 320 wolves against the entire Ravoran military." Draven smiled grimly. "When you say it like that, it sounds impossible." "Good. Because impossible odds mean they will not expect us to actually try. What are you thinking?" Lyanna's eyes gleamed with the same strategic brilliance that had kept the sanctuary alive against overwhelming force. "We do not attack the capital militarily. We cannot win that fight. Instead, we attack the one thing the council cannot defend against. Which is the truth. We expose every crime they have committed, every lie they have told, every atrocity they ordered. We make it impossible for the citizens to pretend they do not know what kind of wolves rule them." "How?" Lyanna smiled. "The same way I built the sanctuary. One wolf at a time, one story at a time, one truth at a time, until the weight of it becomes impossible to ignore." She sat up slowly, wincing but determined. "We gather every wolf who was harmed by the Empire's policies, every refugee created by their wars, every family destroyed by their corruption. We march them to the capital gates, and we make the council look them in the eyes while explaining why their suffering was necessary. And when the council refuses, then we make sure everyone witnesses that refusal. We make sure every citizen sees their rulers choosing power over accountability. We make sure the Empire's cruelty becomes impossible to deny." Draven absorbed the plan. That could take weeks to organize. Then we have weeks. The council thinks we are licking our wounds. They think the siege broke us. Let them believe that while we gather enough evidence to bury them. "You are talking about putting yourself in danger again." "I have been in danger since the moment I questioned whether alphas deserved automatic authority over omegas. This is just making that danger serve a purpose." Lyanna swung her legs over the side of the bed and stood on shaking legs. "Send word to every rogue pack, every displaced omega, every wolf who ever suffered under the Empire's rule. Tell them the Moon Queen is calling in every debt. Tell them it is time to stop hiding and start demanding the world they deserve." Her voice hardened. "Tell them we are going to war, not with swords and claws, but with truth and testimony, and the kind of justice that cannot be buried in mass graves." The gathering took 3 weeks. They came from everywhere. Rogues from the northern wastes, omegas from starving districts in the south, alphas who had been stripped of rank for questioning orders, families who lost children to wars that accomplished nothing, elders who remembered when the Empire claimed to serve the people instead of exploiting them. They came in groups of 5 and 50 and 500. By the end of the 3rd week, over 2,000 wolves had assembled in the ruins of Valemore Keep. Not an army, a movement. Draven stood on what remained of the outer wall and watched them arrive with something approaching awe. These were wolves the Empire discarded as worthless, broken, useless, not worth the effort of protecting or including. And yet here they were, organizing themselves, sharing resources, creating a community that functioned despite having no formal hierarchy or enforcement mechanisms. They were proof that Lyanna's way worked. The old wolf joined him on the wall. "Never thought I would see this many rogues in one place without violence breaking out. They have something to fight for that matters more than dominance games," Draven said. "They have a chance to prove the Empire wrong about everything." "You really think this will work?" Walking 2,000 wolves to the capital gates and demanding accountability? I think it is the only option that does not require becoming the very thing we are trying to destroy. Military coups just replace one tyrant with another. This might actually change the system instead of just changing who controls it. The old wolf grunted. You have gotten philosophical in your old age. I had a good teacher. He gestured toward Lyanna, moving through the crowd below, speaking with newly arrived refugees, organizing supply distribution, settling disputes before they escalated. She had recovered enough to function, but still carried visible wounds. The scars would be permanent, both the physical ones and the deeper damage that came from nearly dying to protect an idea. But she stood straight and spoke with authority that came from being worth following instead of being too dangerous to oppose. When do we march? The old wolf asked. 3 days. Give everyone time to rest and hear the plan. Make sure they understand what we are asking them to walk into. And if the council attacks us on the road, then we have witnesses, citizens from the villages we pass, merchants on the trade routes, everyone who sees Ravaran's military slaughtering refugees demanding justice. The old wolf smiled grimly. You are learning. I had 3 years of suffering to teach me. Turns out pain is an excellent educator. Teeks. The march began at dawn on a morning cold enough to freeze breath in the air. 2,000 wolves left the ruins of Valemore Keep and began the journey south toward Ravaran's capital. They traveled in organized columns. No weapons except for a few guards on the perimeter. No battle cries or war chants. Just wolves walking with quiet determination toward a confrontation that would either change everything or end in massacre. Draven and Lyanna led from the front. She wore simple traveling clothes instead of armor. No crown or symbols of authority beyond the respect other wolves showed her. She looked like exactly what she was. A healer who decided that fixing one broken wolf at a time was not enough when the entire system needed healing. Draven wore no royal insignia either. He had left the trappings of kingship behind in the throne room that felt like a tomb. He was just an alpha who finally learned that strength meant protecting instead of dominating. The first village they passed through greeted them with suspicion that slowly transformed into cautious curiosity. Word had spread about the siege at Valemore Keep, about the sanctuary that survived impossible odds, about the Moon Queen who built something that should not have worked but did anyway. Villagers lined the streets to watch the procession pass. Some whispered, some stared. Some saw family members they thought were dead walking among the refugees and broke down weeping. This was the Empire's dirty secret made visible. All the wolves discarded and forgotten and told they did not matter. Still alive, still trying, still refusing to accept the world as it was. By the second day, their numbers had grown. Villagers joined the march, workers who were tired of starvation wages, families who lost children to wars that accomplished nothing. Anyone who ever questioned whether the Empire actually served them. By the fourth day, they numbered over 3,000. By the seventh day, nearly 5,000 wolves walked toward the capital demanding answers. The council would have heard reports by now, would have received intelligence about the growing movement heading toward their seat of power. Draven expected them to send soldiers to disperse the march before it reached the capital. Instead, they did something worse. They sent Cade. The former second-in-command appeared on the road ahead with a small escort of elite guards. He sat his horse with the same calm control Draven remembered from years of working together. The march ground to a halt. Draven walked forward alone to meet him, while Lyanna remained with the main group. Her hand rested on the shoulder of a young Omega who looked terrified that the Empire's soldiers had found them. Cade dismounted and approached until only a few feet separated him from the king he betrayed. "Hello, old friend," Cade said. His tone was neutral, professional, like they were meeting to discuss routine military matters instead of standing on the edge of revolution. "You should not be here," Draven said. "Neither should you. You should be sitting on your throne, ruling the empire you spent decades building. Instead, you are leading a mob of rogues towards certain death." "They are not a mob. They are citizens demanding accountability." Cade glanced past Draven at the thousands of wolves stretching back along the road. They are refugees and outcasts who do not understand how the world works. They think appealing to mercy will change minds that have already decided their lives have no value. Then maybe those minds need changing. Cade's expression hardened. I came to deliver a message from the council. Turn back now, and they will consider pardoning everyone involved. Continue toward the capital, and they will be forced to respond with lethal force. Forced, Draven repeated. Interesting word choice, like they have no agency in the decision. They have a responsibility to maintain order. They have a responsibility to govern justly. There is a difference. Justice is whatever those in power say it is. Draven stared at the wolf he once trusted more than anyone and saw the fundamental divide that could never be bridged. Cade believed power created truth. Draven had learned that truth eventually destroyed unjust power. We are not turning back, Draven said quietly. Then you are all going to die. Maybe. But we will die trying to create something better than what you are protecting. Cade's jaw tightened. You used to understand that empires require hard choices, that maintaining civilization means making decisions others are too weak to make. When did you become so soft? When I realized that calling cruelty a hard choice was just a way of avoiding accountability. When I understood that wolves who claim they have no choice are just wolves unwilling to explore options that do not serve their interests. Draven stepped closer. You chose to betray me because I stopped ruling the way you wanted. That was not a hard choice. That was a selfish choice. And you have been calling it duty ever since to avoid admitting you prioritized your comfort over everyone else's survival. Cade's hand moved toward his weapon before he caught himself. The guards behind him tensed. Careful, Draven said. Killing me in front of 5,000 witnesses would make me a martyr. Is that what the council wants? What the council wants is for this rebellion to end before it spreads. What happens to you specifically matters less than stopping the idea you represent. The idea that rulers should be accountable? The idea that anyone can question their betters and demand changes to a system that has functioned for generations. Functioned for who? Draven asked. Not for the starving districts, not for the families destroyed by pointless wars, not for any wolf who did not fit the narrow definition of valuable the Empire uses to justify exploitation. Cade's expression shifted into something that might have been pity. You really think this will work? You really think marching a bunch of broken wolves to the capital gates will change anything? I think it is better than accepting that cruelty is inevitable. Idealism gets people killed. Cynicism keeps them slaves. They stared at each other, two wolves who once fought side by side now standing on opposite sides of a divide that was unbridgeable. Last chance, Cade said. Turn back and live. Continue forward and die. Draven did not hesitate. We continue. Cade nodded slowly like he expected that answer. Then I will see you at the capital gates. He mounted his horse and rode back toward his escort. Before he left, he looked back one final time. I'm sorry it came to this. No, you are not, Draven said. You are sorry you have to kill us instead of us accepting our place. There is a difference. Cade's expression hardened. You are right. I am not sorry. You chose this. Then he was gone, leaving Draven standing in the middle of the road while 5,000 wolves waited to see what came next. Lyanna approached. What did he say? The council refuses to negotiate. If we continue, they will use lethal force to stop us. Lyanna absorbed that. Do we continue? Draven looked back at the thousands of wolves who had traveled this far believing that maybe, just maybe, the world could be different than what they were told to accept. Families holding children too young to understand why their parents looked so afraid. Elders who had survived decades of cruelty and refused to accept more. Rogues who found purpose in fighting for something bigger than themselves. We continue, Draven said, all the way to the gates. They reached the capital 3 days later. Ravarin spread across the valley like a monument to dominance made permanent. Massive walls surrounded districts organized by wealth and status. The palace sat at the center, a fortress designed to intimidate anyone who approached. 5,000 wolves stood outside the gates, while the Empire's soldiers stared down at them from the battlements. Neither side moved. The tension was a physical thing, pressing down on everyone like weight that made breathing difficult. Draven stepped forward alone and raised his voice to carry across the space between the refugees and the soldiers. I am Draven Kaelor, Alpha King of Ravarin. I request an audience with the Noble Council to address grievances on behalf of these citizens. Silence. Then a figure appeared on the wall. Not Cade. Someone older, more decorated. Lord Chancellor Varric, the head of the noble council, looked down at the assembled wolves with an expression of cold calculation. "You abandoned your throne," Varric called out. "You have no authority to request anything. I am still the rightful ruler until formally deposed through proper channels. The council's declaration holds no legal weight without a trial. You will not receive a trial. Then you confirm this government operates outside its own laws when convenient." Gasps rippled through the refugees. This was what Lyanna had planned. Force the council to justify their actions publicly. Make them choose between admitting their corruption or following their own rules. Varric's expression did not change. "These wolves are trespassing on imperial property. Disperse immediately or face consequences." These wolves are citizens demanding accountability for policies that starved them, wars that killed their children, and a system designed to exploit anyone without power. They are refugees and rogues with no standing. "They are people," Draven said, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd, "and they deserve answers." He gestured at the masses behind him. "This is the Empire's legacy. Thousands of wolves you discarded as worthless, families you destroyed pursuing glory, children you orphaned fighting wars that accomplished nothing. They came here asking one simple question." Draven's voice hardened. "Why do you believe their suffering was necessary?" The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Varric smiled coldly. "Because maintaining civilization requires sacrifice. Not everyone can thrive. Some must struggle so others can lead. That is the natural order. Who decides who struggles and who leads? Those strong enough to make hard choices. Convenient that the people making those choices never sacrifice themselves. Someone must govern. Someone must maintain order. And someone must question whether that order serves the people or just the ones governing them." Draven turned to address the refugees as much as the council. 3 years ago, I stood in a war chamber and told the woman I loved that she was not strong enough to stand beside me. I said compassion was weakness. I said mercy had no place in leadership. I believed every lie the Empire taught me about strength and power and what it means to rule. His voice cracked slightly. And I was wrong about everything. He turned back to the wall. "This empire is built on a foundation of lies. Lies that say some wolves matter more than others. Lies that say cruelty is necessary for security. Lies that say questioning authority makes you a traitor instead of a citizen demanding better. And I helped build those lies. I enforced them. I sent soldiers to die for them." He met Varric's eyes. "But I am done lying. And I am done letting you hide behind traditions and laws you only follow when convenient." Varric's expression hardened. "You have 1 hour to disperse before we clear this area by force." "Then clear it," Draven said. "Kill refugees in front of witnesses. Murder citizens demanding accountability. Prove to everyone watching that the Empire values maintaining power over pursuing justice. Do it, and see how long you remain in control." The soldiers on the wall shifted uncomfortably, because this was the wedge Lyanna had identified. Most soldiers were not monsters. They were wolves following orders, believing their leaders had justifications that made the cruelty necessary. Force them to commit atrocities without those justifications, and some would refuse. Not all. Maybe not even most. But enough. Varric opened his mouth to respond when Lyanna stepped forward. She walked through the crowd until she stood beside Draven, her presence drawing every eye. "I am Lyanna Vey," she called out. "The Omega your council declared too weak to stand beside a king. The woman you said made him soft. The threat you sent 50 soldiers to eliminate. She let that settle. I built a sanctuary in the frozen north for wolves you discarded. Rogues with nowhere to go. Omegas you said had no value. Children orphaned by your wars. I gave them safety and dignity and a chance to prove their worth." Her voice hardened. "And you sent an army to murder them for it." Gasps from the refugees. Angry shouts. Lyanna raised her hand for quiet. But they survived. Those wolves you called worthless fought off your trained soldiers. Those Omegas you called weak defended children while your elite guards fled. Those rogues you called broken built something that worked better than anything your empire produced." She stepped closer to the gates. "So here's my question for the council. If we are so weak, why did it take an army to try stopping us? If we are so worthless, why do you fear us enough to commit murder? If we are so broken, why are you the ones terrified of what we built?" The silence was absolute. Then Varric's expression shifted into something cruel. Because infections must be burned out before they spread. Because allowing weakness to survive encourages more weakness. Because the Empire cannot function if every rogue and Omega thinks they deserve consideration. His voice echoed across the valley. "You are not people. You are failures, and failures do not get to question their betters." The refugees erupted in anger. Soldiers on the wall drew weapons. And Draven understood that this was the moment where everything changed or everything ended. He raised his hands for quiet. The crowd slowly settled, but the fury remained visible on every face. "Then let it be known," Draven called out, "that the noble council of Ravarin openly admits they value power over people, that they consider citizens questioning their governance to be a disease requiring extermination, that they believe strength gives them the right to commit any atrocity without consequence." He turned to address the refugees. "Let it be known that we came here peacefully. We brought no weapons. We asked for dialogue. And they responded by calling us infections requiring burning. Back to the wall. Let it be known that what happens next is their choice, not ours." Varric's smile widened. "Archers. Ready." Hundreds of bows appeared on the battlements, all pointed at the refugees below. And Draven Kaelor, former Alpha King of Ravarin, made the hardest choice of his life. He stepped in front of Lyanna and spread his arms wide, shielding her body with his own. "If you want to kill them," he said quietly, "you go through me first." Beside him, Lyanna grabbed his arm. "What are you doing?" "What I should have done 3 years ago," he said without taking his eyes off the wall. "Choosing you over everything else." The archers drew back their bowstrings. 5,000 wolves held their breath, and the Empire prepared to show exactly what it valued. The arrows never flew. Because in the moment before Varric could give the order, something impossible happened. The soldiers lowered their bows. Not all of them, not even most of them at first, but enough that the perfect formation of death pointed at the refugees fractured into uncertainty. A young archer on the eastern wall dropped his weapon entirely. It clattered against stone with a sound that echoed across the sudden silence. Then another soldier lowered his bow. Then 3 more. Then entire sections of the wall rippled with wolves refusing the order to murder unarmed civilians. Varric's face went crimson with rage. "I said ready those weapons." "We heard you," one of the soldiers called back, a grizzled veteran with scars covering half his face. "And we refuse. You dare disobey a direct command?" The veteran stepped forward to the edge of the battlements. "I have followed orders for 20 years. I killed for this empire in 7 different campaigns. I watched friends die securing borders that changed hands the following season. I have done terrible things because I believed the council had justifications I was not seeing." His voice carried across the valley. "But I will not murder refugees asking for accountability. I will not kill children because their parents questioned whether the empire actually serves them. I will not become the monster we claim to oppose." He dropped his bow over the wall. It fell through empty air and struck the ground at Draven's feet. Other soldiers began following his example. Bows and swords and spears rained down from the battlements in a cascade of rejected violence. Not everyone. At least half the garrison kept their weapons ready, but the unified front of Imperial authority had cracked in a way that could not be repaired. Varric stared at his fragmenting forces with an expression that mixed disbelief and fury in equal measure. "This is treason." "This is conscience," the veteran replied. "Something you should try." Below, the refugees erupted in cheers and weeping. Wolves who thought they were seconds from death collapsed to their knees. Others clutched their children tight. The old wolf stood with tears streaming down his scarred face. Draven remained motionless, his arms still spread wide, positioned between Lyanna and the arrows that had not come. His heart hammered so hard he thought his ribs might crack. Sweat mixed with the dust covering his face. Every muscle screamed from the tension of waiting for death that chose a different target. Lyanna grabbed his arm and pulled him around to face her. "You could have died." "I know. You could have died, and I would have watched it happen." "I know," he repeated quietly. "But some things matter more than survival. You taught me that." She stared at him with an expression that cycled through fury and grief, and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. You are the most infuriating wolf I have ever met. I know that too. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Then she turned back toward the wall where Varric was screaming at his remaining loyal soldiers to restore order. This is not over, she said. No, but it is starting. Because what they had just witnessed was not a victory. It was a fracture. The Empire's foundation had developed a crack that would either be sealed through brutal violence or would spread until the entire structure collapsed. The next hours would determine which. Varric disappeared from the battlements, but the gates remained closed, and the loyal soldiers kept their weapons ready. The standoff continued as the sun climbed higher and the temperature dropped despite the daylight. Refugees huddled together for warmth and waited to see what came next. Some still looked terrified. Others looked hopeful in a way that was almost painful to witness. Hope was dangerous when you had spent your life learning to suppress it. Draven organized the wolves into groups, families with children toward the center where they would be protected if violence erupted. Able-bodied adults forming loose perimeter defense. Healers identifying anyone too weak to move quickly if evacuation became necessary. They were not an army, but they were learning to think like one. Lyanna moved through the crowd speaking quietly with refugees, listening to their stories, recording their testimonies. Each one was a piece of evidence against the Empire's claim that their suffering was necessary. A mother who lost 3 children to wars that accomplished nothing. An elder who watched his village starve while grain shipments were diverted to wealthy districts. An Omega who was beaten for daring to suggest that pack law treated her gender as property instead of people. Story after story after story until the weight of collective suffering became impossible to dismiss as isolated incidents or necessary sacrifices. This was systematic cruelty presented as governance. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the horizon. The gates remained closed. Then, as twilight painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, something shifted. The gates opened. Not violently, not with soldiers pouring out to attack, just slowly creaking open like a mouth preparing to speak. Everyone froze. Draven stepped forward instinctively, positioning himself at the front of the refugees. Lyanna moved beside him without being asked. The old wolf joined them along with several others who had proven themselves leaders during the march. A figure emerged from the gate flanked by a small escort. Not Varric, someone younger. A woman wearing the robes of a council member but with an expression that suggested she was not entirely comfortable with what she was about to do. Lady Sarah Marlowe, one of the council's newer members. Draven remembered her from before he left the capital. She had been quiet during meetings, had occasionally questioned aggressive policies before being shut down by older wolves who considered her input irrelevant. She approached slowly, hands empty and visible. Her escort stayed back near the gates. "Alpha King?" she said formally. Then she looked at Lyanna. "Moon Queen." The titles hung in the air like acknowledgement of authority the council had spent months denying. "I come with a message from the council," Sarah continued. "They are willing to negotiate." "Negotiate what?" Draven asked. "Terms of surrender." "Whose surrender?" Sarah's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "Yours?" "Officially. But in practice, everyone's. The council understands that the situation has become untenable. Too many soldiers refuse to follow orders. Too many citizens are asking questions. Too much truth has been exposed to maintain the previous narrative." She glanced back at the gates. "But they will not admit wrongdoing publicly. They will not submit to trials or accountability. They are offering a compromise. You disband this gathering and return to your northern sanctuary. In exchange, they will implement reforms addressing some of the grievances you have raised." "Which reforms?" "The ones that do not threaten their power. Better food distribution to outer districts. Stricter oversight of military campaigns. Representation for Omega voices in local governance." Lyanna's expression hardened. "Nothing that changes the fundamental power structure." Sarah nodded. "Nothing that changes who rules and how. So they are offering to make the cage slightly larger while keeping us locked inside. That is one way to describe it." Draven studied the council member carefully. "What do you believe we should do?" Sarah hesitated, clearly weighing the consequences of honest answer against political survival. "I believe you should reject their offer and keep pushing. I believe the Empire is more fragile than it appears. I believe what happened on those walls today proves that most wolves are not monsters. They are just following orders because no one has given them permission to question. She stepped closer. But I also believe that if you push too hard, the council will resort to extreme violence to restore control. They will burn this entire valley to prove they still have power. They will kill everyone here and call it restoring order. Her voice dropped. So the question is not what you should do. The question is what you are willing to sacrifice to make permanent change versus temporary concessions. The weight of that question settled over the assembled leaders like a burial shroud. Because this was the fundamental problem with fighting systems instead of individuals. Systems could not be defeated in single battles. They required sustained pressure over time, and sustained pressure required wolves staying alive long enough to apply it. "Give us the night to discuss," Draven said. "We will have an answer by morning." Sarah nodded and retreated back through the gates. They closed behind her with a finality that sounded like judgment being deferred rather than delivered. The refugee camp erupted in discussion. Everyone had opinions about what should happen next. Some wanted to accept the reforms and live to fight another day. Others wanted to keep pushing until the entire system collapsed. Still others just wanted to go home and try to rebuild lives that had been shattered. There was no consensus because there was no single right answer. Draven gathered the core leadership group in a tent erected near the center of camp. Lyanna, the old wolf, several rogue pack leaders who commanded respect, and a handful of Omegas who represented the most oppressed voices. They talked through the night while refugees slept or tried to sleep around them. They debated and argued and eventually arrived at something that was not agreement but was at least direction. As dawn broke over the valley, Draven emerged from the tent knowing what had to happen next, and knowing it would cost him everything. He found Lyanna standing at the edge of camp watching the sunrise paint the capital walls in shades of gold and red. "We have a decision," he said quietly. She did not turn. "I know what you are going to say. Then you know I am right. Right and necessary are not the same thing. They are today." Lyanna finally looked at him. "You are planning to offer yourself in exchange for reforms, not offer. Demand." "I walk back into that capital and submit to whatever judgment the council wants. Public trial. Execution. Imprisonment. Whatever appeases their need to punish someone for this rebellion. In exchange for guaranteed reforms that actually change people's lives. And you get to walk away. You and everyone who followed us here. The council gets their villain to parade around as proof that questioning authority has consequences. You get concrete policy changes that improve conditions for the wolves who need it most." Lyanna's hands clenched into fists. "That is not justice." "No, but it is progress. And sometimes progress requires sacrifice that feels unjust. You are martyring yourself. I am paying the price for decades of being the kind of ruler who created the need for this rebellion in the first place. I am accepting consequences I should have faced years ago when you first tried to tell me the truth." Draven turned her gently to face him. "I was the Alpha King who enforced the corrupt system. I was the wolf who sent soldiers to die in pointless wars. I was the ruler who ignored starving districts because acknowledging them would have required admitting the empire was failing." His voice roughened. "Every crime the council has committed, I enabled. Every atrocity they ordered, I made possible by building the power structures they now abuse. So if someone needs to pay for those sins, it should be the wolf most responsible." Lyanna's eyes glistened. "You have changed. You are not that king anymore." "No. But I was him long enough to destroy countless lives. Changing does not erase what I did. It just means I finally understand why it was wrong." He pulled her closer. "Let me do this. Let me fix at least some of what I broke. Let me prove that the wolf you tried to save 3 years ago was worth the effort, even if it took too long to become him." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I did not survive losing you once to watch you walk to your death now. You will not lose me. You will just have to remember me differently. Not as the king who destroyed you, but as the wolf who finally learned that some things matter more than survival." "What about us? What about the bond?" The mate bond that never fully broke pulsed between them with an intensity that was physically painful. "The bond survives," Draven said quietly. "It survived 3 years of separation. It will survive whatever comes next. And maybe someday, in whatever exists beyond this life, We will get the time together that we should have had here. Lyanna grabbed the front of his shirt and pulled him into a kiss that tasted like grief and acceptance, and 3 years of pain finally finding resolution. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I hate you for this," she whispered. "I know. I hate that you are right. I know. I hate that I have to let you go again. I know," he said, his voice breaking. "But you have to build what comes next. You have to make sure these wolves get the world they deserve. You have to prove that the sacrifice meant something. Promise me." Lyanna pulled back far enough to meet his eyes. "I promise. But you have to promise me something too. Anything. Promise me that when they put you on trial, when they try to break you down and make you admit that compassion was weakness, you stand firm. You tell them the truth. You make sure everyone watching understands that the Empire failed because it valued power over people." Her grip tightened. "Promise me you make them see what they could have been if they had just listened. I promise." They stood together while the sun continued rising and the capital prepared for whatever came next. Draven presented himself at the gates 2 hours later, alone, unarmed, wearing simple traveling clothes instead of anything that suggested royal authority. The gates opened and soldiers escorted him through streets that felt alien despite being the same paths he had walked for decades. The capital looked different when you saw it as a prisoner instead of a ruler. Cleaner than it should be given the poverty in outer districts. Grander than necessary given the starving villages beyond the walls. Built to intimidate and impress rather than serve and protect. Everything about the architecture screamed dominance as the organizing principle of society. They brought him to the palace throne room where the full noble council waited. Varric sat in the center with an expression of cold satisfaction. Other council members flanked him, their faces showing varying degrees of triumph and unease. Cade stood off to the side. His former second-in-command would not meet his eyes. "Draven Kaelor," Varric intoned formally, "you stand accused of treason against the Empire of Ravarin. How do you plead?" Draven met his eyes without flinching. "I plead that empires requiring this much cruelty to function do not deserve to survive." Gasps echoed through the chamber. "That is not a recognized plea. It is the truth, which I understand this council has limited experience with." Varric's expression hardened. "You abandoned your throne to consort with rogues and outcasts. You led an armed rebellion against legitimate authority. You encouraged citizens to question laws that have maintained order for generations. I encourage citizens to demand accountability from rulers who stopped serving them. There is a difference. Semantics will not save you. I'm not trying to save myself. I'm trying to save the Empire from the wolves who are destroying it from within." Draven gestured at the assembled council. "You call me a traitor, but you are the ones who betrayed everything this empire was supposed to represent. You enriched yourselves while citizens starved. You started wars to consolidate power while families were destroyed. You built a system designed to crush anyone who did not serve your interests." His voice rose. "I was part of that system. I enforced those policies. I ignored the suffering because acknowledging it would have required admitting I was wrong. So yes, I am guilty. Guilty of being exactly the kind of ruler who created the need for rebellion. But my crime is not questioning your authority. My crime is that I did not question it sooner." The chamber erupted in shouting. Council members demanded he be silenced. Soldiers moved to drag him away. Varric raised his hand for quiet. "You will have your chance to speak at the public trial. Until then, you will be held in the palace dungeons. What about the reforms?" Varric smiled coldly. "What reforms?" "The ones you offered in exchange for my surrender. We offered temporary concessions to disperse a mob. Now that the threat is contained, those offers are rescinded." Draven had expected this, had known the council would not honor their word, but hearing it confirmed still hit like a physical blow. "So you lied. We said what was necessary to restore order. Now order is restored and you will face consequences for your treason. What about the refugees outside your walls? They will be given until sunset to disperse. Any remaining after dark will be arrested or eliminated." Draven's hands clenched into fists, but he kept his voice level. "You are making a mistake. We are restoring stability. You're proving that the Empire cannot be reformed from within. You're showing every wolf watching that the system is exactly as corrupt as we claimed. You're creating the conditions for real revolution instead of peaceful transition. Varric leaned forward. There will be no revolution. There will only be order maintained through whatever force proves necessary. Your Omega and her collection of broken wolves will scatter when they realize their champion cannot save them. His smile widened. And you will die knowing you accomplish nothing except demonstrating what happens to wolves who forget their place. They threw Draven into a cell deep beneath the palace. Stone walls covered in moisture and mold. No windows. No light except what leaked under the door. The kind of place designed to break spirits before executions made it permanent. He sat on the floor and tried not to think about Lyanna outside the walls, wondering if he was already dead. Hours passed in darkness so complete that Draven lost track of time. His wounds from the siege at Vilemore Keep still ached. His body demanded rest it could not get on cold stone. His mind cycled through every choice that led him to this cell and found no alternatives that would have resulted in anything different. This was always where it would end. Kings who betrayed their empires died in dungeons or on scaffolds. That was the price of trying to dismantle systems from the inside. Footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. A key turned in the lock. The door opened, revealing Cade silhouetted against torchlight. His former second-in-command entered and closed the door behind him. They stared at each other in the dim light leaking through the cracks. "I am here to offer you a choice," Cade said finally. "I am not interested in choices from wolves who sell out their friends. Even if this choice could save your life, especially then, because I know what the price would be." Cade pulled up a stool and sat across from Draven. "The council is divided. Half want to execute you immediately as a warning. Half want a prolonged public trial that exposes every detail of your relationship with the Omega and uses it to discredit compassion as weakness. And you? I want the version of you I followed for 20 years to come back. The strong king who made hard choices without hesitation. The ruler who understood that empires require brutal decisiveness." Cade leaned forward. "Renounce the Omega. Admit she seduced you into temporary insanity. Swear loyalty to the council and help them restore the old order. They will pardon you, reinstate you, let you reclaim the throne under their supervision, in exchange for becoming their puppet and betraying everything I finally learned to believe, in exchange for surviving. For having influence you can use to make changes from within the system instead of dying uselessly in a cell." Draven laughed, bitter and broken. "You still do not understand. There is no changing this system from within. The corruption is not a bug. It is a feature. The cruelty is not an accident. It is the foundation. The only way to fix it is to tear it down and build something new. And that requires someone willing to show through their death that the Emperor has no clothes." Cade's expression hardened. "You are choosing martyrdom over survival. I am choosing truth over comfort." Finally, after decades of doing the opposite, they sat in silence while the weight of irreconcilable differences pressed down on them. "I am sorry it came to this," Cade said eventually. "No, you are not. You are sorry I changed into something you cannot follow, but you are not sorry about the choices you made to stop me." Cade stood. "The trial begins tomorrow. Varric plans to break you publicly, make you admit your relationship with the Omega was shameful, force you to beg for mercy you will not receive. Let him try. This is your last chance to save yourself." Draven met his eyes. "I'm not trying to save myself. I'm trying to save everyone else from the wolves who think might makes right." Cade stared at him for a long moment, then turned and left without another word. The door clanged shut. The darkness returned, and Draven sat alone knowing that tomorrow he would either inspire change or die, proving why it was necessary. Either way, the version of himself who destroyed Lyanna would finally face consequences. And maybe that was the only redemption available to kings who built empires on corpses. They brought him to the palace courtyard the next morning in chains. Thousands of citizens had gathered to watch the trial. The council had made it a public spectacle, proof that questioning authority led to ruin, a warning to anyone considering similar rebellion. But spectacles were dangerous things, because once you gathered an audience, you lost control of what they witnessed. Draven stood in the center of the courtyard while Varric read the charges. Treason, sedition, abandonment of duty, consorting with enemies of the state. The list went on long enough that people began shifting uncomfortably. How do you answer these charges? Varric demanded. Guilty, Draven said simply. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Guilty of abandoning my throne. Guilty of questioning the Empire's policies. Guilty of believing that citizens deserve accountability from their rulers. Guilty of all of it. He looked at the assembled citizens. But my crime is not treason against the Empire. My crime is that I spent decades enforcing a system designed to crush anyone who did not serve the interests of wolves already in power. My crime is that I ignored suffering because acknowledging it would have required changing policies that benefited me. His voice carried across the courtyard. My crime is that when the woman I loved tried to tell me the truth about the rot spreading through this empire, I destroyed her for it because accepting that truth would have meant admitting I was wrong. Varric tried to interrupt, but Draven's voice rose over him. 3 years ago, I told Lyanna Vey that she was not strong enough to stand beside a king, that her compassion was weakness, that caring about starving districts and needless wars meant she did not understand how empires worked. I was wrong about everything. She understood exactly how empires work. They work by convincing those with power that their cruelty is necessary. They work by making soldiers believe orders from above carry moral weight. They work by crushing anyone who questions whether the suffering they cause actually serves the people they claim to protect. He met Varric's furious gaze. And when someone finally exposes those lies, empires resort to exactly what you are doing now. Public trials designed to intimidate, executions meant to terrify, violence presented as justice. But here's what you do not understand. I am not afraid of dying. I am afraid of living in a world where wolves like you keep destroying wolves like Lyanna, because her existence proves everything you believe is a lie. So yes, I am guilty. Guilty of finally choosing truth over power. Guilty of valuing people over empire. Guilty of becoming the wolf I should have been from the beginning. The courtyard was silent. Then someone in the crowd began clapping, slowly at first. Then others joined. Then entire sections of the audience were applauding while Varric screamed for order. The guards moved to silence the crowd, but there were too many citizens and not enough soldiers willing to commit violence against them. The spectacle had escaped the council's control. Varric's face went crimson. Enough. You are sentenced to death by execution. Tomorrow at dawn. Fine, Draven said, but know that my death will not stop what started. It will not erase the truth I spoke. It will not convince citizens that the Empire serves them when they can see with their own eyes that it serves only you. He looked at the crowd one last time. Remember what you witnessed here. Remember that they could not answer the charges I made. Remember that they chose execution over accountability. And when the Empire finally falls, remember that it was not destroyed by external enemies or weak rulers. It destroyed itself by mistaking cruelty for strength. Misig. They threw him back in the cell to await execution. Draven sat in darkness and thought about Lyanna outside the walls, wondering if the sacrifice would mean anything. Hours passed. Night fell. The execution would come with sunrise. Then the door opened again. But not Cade this time. Lyanna stood silhouetted against torchlight. Draven surged to his feet. How did you get in here? The same soldiers who refused to murder refugees helped me bypass the guards. Turns out your speech inspired more than just citizens. She entered and closed the door behind her. They stood facing each other in the dim light. You should not be here, Draven said. If they catch you, I do not care. I am not letting you die alone in this cell without saying what needs to be said. Lyanna crossed the space between them. 3 years ago, you destroyed me. You made me question everything about myself. You took the person I was and broke her into pieces. I know. But you also taught me something crucial. You taught me that I did not need you to be strong, that I did not need anyone's permission to matter, that my worth was not determined by whether an alpha chose to value me. Her voice softened. You taught me that by being the worst version of yourself, by showing me exactly what happens when love comes with conditions, by proving that some wounds only heal when you escape the person causing them. I am sorry. She put her hand over his mouth. I am not finished. He quieted. You broke me, and I rebuilt myself stronger. You destroyed what we had, and I created something better in the ruins. You were the villain in my story for 3 years. But then you came back, and you knelt in the snow, and you stood in front of arrows meant for me. And you are about to die trying to fix what you broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks. And I need you to know that I forgive you. Not because you earned it, not because the pain is gone, but because holding on to that anger is keeping me from acknowledging something important. What? That I still love you? I never stopped loving you. I hated you and missed you and loved you all at the same time, and it nearly killed me. She pulled him closer. So if you are going to die tomorrow, you are going to die knowing that the woman